Hi guys. Tonight we're leaving behind the comfort of settled towns and following the fading light toward a horizon that seems to stretch forever. Before you lies a wilderness so vast that no fence interrupts the wind, no church bell marks the passing hour, and no road promises an easy return. You can almost hear a river flowing through endless forests while distant mountain peaks glow beneath the last colours of evening. Somewhere ahead, a lone rider urges a tired horse across open grass, carrying little more than hope, steel, and experience. The American mountain man is about to step into one of the most remarkable chapters in frontier history, where survival depends less on strength than on patience, observation, and quiet determination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight, along with your local time. It is always wonderful to see people from around the world gathering for these peaceful journeys through history. Now, dim the lights. Your breathing slows as you leave behind the final wooden cabins of the young United States. Ahead, the land grows larger with every mile. Forests seem endless. Rivers twist through untouched valleys. Snow rests upon distant peaks that few people from the eastern states have ever seen. The air smells of damp earth mixed with fresh pine, while a gentle breeze carries the faint scent of wood smoke from the last frontier settlement disappearing behind you. This is America at the opening of the 19th century. The nation is still young, yet its imagination reaches far beyond its borders. Stories spread through taverns, trading posts, and newspapers about immense western lands filled with valuable beaver, towering mountains, and rivers that seem to flow forever toward unknown horizons. Few people truly understand what waits beyond the frontier. You soon realize that becoming a mountain man is never simply about adventure. It begins with necessity. Many young men leave farms where the soil barely feeds a family. Others seek escape from debts, disappointment, or lives that feel too ordinary. A handful are former soldiers searching for purpose after conflict. Some simply possess restless spirits that refuse to remain inside settled communities. Their destination is not a city. It is uncertainty. The western wilderness offers both astonishing opportunity and constant danger. Every valley promises fresh streams filled with beaver. Every ridge may reveal untouched trapping grounds. Yet every journey also carries the possibility of hunger, freezing temperatures, accidents, or becoming hopelessly lost beneath unfamiliar stars. Modern historians generally agree that the expanding fur trade became one of the strongest economic forces driving exploration into the American West during these decades. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University has shown that international demand for beaver felt hats created powerful commercial incentives for traders and trappers to push ever farther into the continent's interior. Yet historians continue debating whether economic ambition alone explains the remarkable speed of Western expansion, or whether personal independence proved just as powerful a motivation. For you, the answer feels wonderfully human. Money matters. Freedom matters too, as your journey continues. The landscape slowly changes beneath your feet. Rolling hills become thicker forests, wide rivers replace familiar roads. The silence itself feels different. Instead of busy marketplaces, you hear woodpeckers tapping old trees, distant wolves greeting the evening, and water slipping over smooth stones polished by countless seasons. The wilderness has its own language. Learning that language takes years. You begin noticing details that settlers rarely consider. Moss growing thicker on one side of ancient trees, animal tracks pressed into soft mud after a night of gentle rain, broken branches revealing where elk recently passed, tiny changes in river currents that hint at hidden rocks beneath the surface. Every observation matters. A careless traveller may overlook these signs entirely. A skilled mountain man treats them as pages inside an open book. You kneel beside a stream, cupping cold water into your hands. The chill surprises you despite the pleasant afternoon. Nearby, Your simple meal waits beside a small cooking fire. It consists of dried meat and coarse bread, hardly luxurious by any measure. Yet after walking for hours beneath the open sky, it tastes unexpectedly satisfying. Simple comforts become treasures. The life ahead offers very few luxuries. Clothing grows stiff with sweat, rain, and smoke. Boots wear thin after endless miles over rough stone. Blankets absorb the scent of campfires until it never truly disappears. Fingers become rough from axes, traps, ropes, and cold rivers. Even so, countless mountain men willingly choose this existence over settled life. The choice puzzles many people back east. Perhaps that is because true wilderness changes the way you think about comfort. Instead of seeking larger houses, you value dry shelter during storms. Instead of fashionable clothing, you appreciate warm buckskin that keeps winter winds away. Instead of crowded streets, you treasure peaceful evenings where only stars fill the sky. For a quiet moment, you simply watch the sunset. Golden light reaches across distant mountains. The colours fade slowly. Night approaches without hurry. Somewhere beyond those ridges lie lands still unfamiliar to nearly every American citizen alive. Maps remain incomplete. Rivers vanish into blank spaces marked only by guesses. Entire mountain ranges wait to be carefully crossed, described, and remembered. Historians often describe this period as standing between two worlds. The United States has begun expanding westward after the Louisiana Purchase, yet enormous regions remain known primarily through indigenous knowledge, scattered trading expeditions, and the reports of explorers. Research associated with Yale University has emphasized that the nation's geographic understanding expanded dramatically during the first decades of the 19th century. Although scholars still debate exactly how rapidly accurate knowledge spread beyond official expeditions into commercial trapping networks, that uncertainty shapes every decision. No traveller possesses perfect information. Even experienced guides sometimes choose the wrong valley or misjudge approaching weather. Snow may arrive weeks earlier than expected. Rivers may swell after distant mountain storms. A shortcut can become a deadly mistake. Patience often saves lives. As darkness settles across the landscape, your campfire becomes the brightest point for miles. Flames dance gently across nearby rocks, while sparks drift upward toward a sky crowded with brilliant stars untouched by city lights. The fire smells pleasantly of dry pine mixed with fresh cedar gathered before sunset. You wrap yourself inside a heavy blanket. The ground remains firm beneath you. Somewhere nearby, a horse quietly grazes. Beyond the circle of firelight, the wilderness continues without end. You realize that this opening night represents something much larger than one person's journey. It marks the beginning of an era, when thousands of determined individuals will venture into these immense landscapes. Some will become wealthy through the fur trade. Others will disappear into rivers, mountains, or forgotten valleys. Many will build lasting friendships across cultures. A few will become legends whose names survive long after the beaver trade itself fades into history. Yet none of them know the ending. Neither do you. For now, there is only the comforting crackle of burning wood, the cool evening breeze upon your face, and the vast American frontier waiting patiently beyond the reach of the fire. Tomorrow, you begin walking deeper into that extraordinary world. Morning arrives quietly across the frontier. The first light filters through tall pines, turning beads of dew into tiny points of gold. Your blanket feels damp from the cool night air, and the fire has settled into a bed of glowing embers beneath soft grey ash. As you stretch your stiff shoulders, the wilderness already seems awake. Small birds chatter somewhere overhead. A squirrel darts along a fallen log. Far beyond the trees, a river continues its endless conversation with smooth stones, sounding exactly as it did yesterday. And perhaps for thousands of years before that, you gather your few possessions with practiced care. Nothing is wasted. Every tool must justify its weight. A heavy pack slows your journey, While forgetting a single useful item may become a serious mistake weeks from the nearest settlement, this simple truth shapes nearly every decision made by the men who travel these western lands. The morning air carries the scent of wet leaves mixed with rich earth. Your boots press into soft ground still dark from the night's moisture. Every step reminds you that there are no roads waiting ahead, only animal paths, river banks, mountain passes, and instinct. The growing fur trade depends upon people willing to accept exactly this kind of uncertainty. By the opening years of the 19th century, fashionable society across Europe and the eastern United States has developed an enormous appetite for fine beaver felt hats. The demand seems almost endless. Gentlemen in London, Paris, Boston, Philadelphia, and New York rarely think about where those luxurious hats begin, yet every elegant hat represents weeks of labour carried out beside freezing streams thousands of miles away. The connection feels strangely distant. One person attends a formal dinner, another sleeps beneath falling snow. That invisible chain of commerce stretches across an entire continent. Major trading companies quickly recognize the opportunity. Investors see enormous profits waiting beyond the frontier, while experienced merchants understand that whoever controls the richest trapping grounds may dominate the market for years. Expeditions begin pushing farther west than ever before, following rumors of untouched valleys filled with healthy beaver colonies. Modern economic historians have noted that the North American fur trade became one of the earliest truly international commercial networks connecting remote wilderness with global fashion markets. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago has emphasized how consumer demand in distant cities directly influenced exploration across the Rocky Mountains. Yet, historians continue debating whether commercial competition accelerated Western exploration more than government interest, or whether both forces grew together in ways that cannot easily be separated. As you continue walking, the forest slowly opens into broad grasslands where morning mist hangs low above the ground. Herds of grazing animals leave fresh tracks across damp soil. Insects hum lazily in the warming sunlight. Somewhere ahead, another trapper may already be checking his trapline, though you never see him. The wilderness allows remarkable solitude. It also hides countless neighbors. A successful trapping expedition begins long before the first trap enters the water. Rivers must be studied carefully. Beaver rarely choose random locations. They prefer slow-moving streams bordered by plentiful trees suitable for building dams and lodges. A careless trapper may waste valuable weeks searching empty waters, while an experienced one notices subtle clues almost immediately. Freshly cut branches, smooth slides into the river, mud packed against a dam. Everything tells a story. You kneel beside one quiet stream where sunlight glitters across calm water. Tiny insects dance above the surface. The air smells clean, carrying faint traces of willow bark and fresh mud. You pause without speaking, simply listening, then you hear it. A gentle splash. Another follows. The sound is almost impossible to notice unless you remain perfectly still. Somewhere nearby, beavers begin another ordinary morning completely unaware that their thick pelts have become one of the world's most valuable natural resources. There is something oddly peaceful about watching them. You almost forget why you came. Yet mountain men rarely possess the luxury of sentiment. Every successful catch means food, trade goods, and another season of survival. Failure may leave a trapper without enough supplies to reach the next rendezvous or trading post. Life becomes mathematics. Not comfortable mathematics. Cold mathematics. How many traps remain usable? How much powder is left? How many weeks before heavy snow closes the mountain passes? How much dried meat can one horse safely carry? Each answer matters. Unlike farmers who measure time through planting and harvest, mountain men organize their lives around rivers, weather, animal migrations, and the changing seasons. Spring often brings swollen streams and active beaver. Summer offers easier travel across high country. Autumn encourages long preparations before winter closes the mountains with dangerous storms. Winter forgives no mistakes. Your thoughts drift toward the people who remain in eastern towns. They wake beneath familiar roofs, greet neighbours, attend churches, visit markets, and return home before nightfall. Meanwhile, here in the wilderness, every day begins with uncertainty. You cannot predict where you'll sleep next week, what weather tomorrow will bring, or whether your next encounter will involve friendship or danger. Oddly enough, many mountain men prefer this freedom. The absence of routine becomes its own reward. As afternoon sunlight climbs higher, you finally encounter a small trapping camp beside a bend in the river. 3 weathered men repair equipment while another carefully scrapes a freshly prepared pelt stretched across a wooden frame. Smoke rises gently from a simple cooking fire where a battered pot simmers with stew made from whatever the surrounding country has recently provided. No one wastes words. Conversation comes slowly. Experienced trappers often judge strangers through quiet observation before offering friendship. Clothing reveals much. Worn buckskin speaks of long journeys. Well-maintained rifles suggest discipline. Horses show whether their owners understand careful travel or careless haste. Trust grows gradually here. It must. Every partner may someday help rescue you from an icy river or share precious food during an unforgiving winter. Historical records suggest that successful trapping often depended less upon individual heroics than upon cooperation. Scholars associated with Stanford University have pointed out that many expeditions survived because members pooled knowledge, equipment, and labour rather than attempting complete independence. At the same time, historians still debate how much popular storytelling later exaggerated the image of the solitary mountain man. Since surviving journals frequently describe teamwork instead of isolation, the evening settles peacefully over the camp. Fresh pelts hang drying beside the fire, releasing the distinctive scent of wet fur mixed with wood smoke. Someone quietly sharpens a knife using a smooth river stone. Another carefully mends torn moccasins with patient hands. No one appears rushed. Tomorrow will bring more work. It always does. You sip warm stew while darkness slowly returns across the valley. The meal is plain, yet comforting after a full day beside cold rivers. Firelight flickers across weathered faces marked by wind, snow, and years spent beneath open skies. These men are not searching for glory. Most never expect their names to appear inside history books. They simply keep moving, river by river, season by season, without fully realizing it. They're helping shape the future map of an entire continent. The stars emerge once more above the quiet wilderness, just as they did the night before. Their steady light reflects softly upon the slow river where tomorrow's traps already wait beneath the dark water. Morning will come again, and with it, another careful step into the remarkable world of the American mountain man. Your camp stirs before sunrise. Long before the warmth reaches the valley floor, the night's chill still clings to every blanket, every saddle, and every piece of iron resting beside the dying fire. When you reach for your canteen, the metal feels almost painfully cold against your fingers. A thin layer of mist floats above the nearby river, softening the outlines of trees until the entire landscape seems suspended between dream and waking. Another day begins. Another lesson waits. No one arrives in the mountains already knowing how to survive. Every legendary mountain man once stood exactly where you stand now, uncertain, inexperienced, and far more confident than wisdom deserved. The wilderness has a remarkable way of correcting misplaced confidence. Usually without mercy, you shoulder your pack and follow an older trapper toward the river. His movements appear almost effortless. He rarely speaks unless necessary. Instead, he watches. His eyes drift across the current, pause briefly on distant hills, then settle upon the muddy shoreline. You begin looking where he looks. At first, you notice nothing unusual. Then the details slowly emerge. A narrow trail pressed into damp earth, fresh hoofprints crossing older ones, broken reeds bending toward the water. What seemed empty only moments ago now feels filled with quiet information. Observation becomes your greatest teacher. Unlike a classroom, the frontier offers no comfortable mistakes. Misreading a river crossing may cost valuable supplies. Ignoring dark clouds beyond distant peaks may leave you trapped inside a snowstorm. Forgetting where you hung dried meat may invite hungry animals before nightfall. Everything has consequences. The older trapper kneels beside a patch of disturbed soil. Without speaking, he brushes away loose dirt using the back of his hand. Beneath it lies the faint outline of an animal track. Not yesterday, earlier this morning. The edges remain sharp, untouched by wind or insects. Even you can begin to recognize the difference. Small victories matter. As the hours pass, your senses gradually sharpen. You begin listening differently. Instead of hearing only birdsong, you notice when the forest suddenly falls silent. That silence often means something larger has entered the area. Perhaps a wolf, perhaps a bear, perhaps another group of travellers moving carefully through the trees. Silence speaks. If you learn to hear it, the air warms steadily beneath a bright blue sky. Pine needles release their clean fragrance as sunlight reaches the forest floor. Somewhere overhead, an eagle circles patiently, carried by invisible currents rising from the valley below. You stop for a moment simply to watch. There is no hurry. The mountains decide the pace. You soon discover that finding food requires more knowledge than determination. A hungry newcomer might chase every animal encountered, wasting precious energy. Experienced mountain men rarely behave that way. They study habits first. They understand where game drinks at dawn, where berries ripen during late summer, and which valleys remain sheltered after early snow. Knowledge feeds you. Strength alone rarely does. The afternoon brings another lesson. Water that appears calm from a distance often hides dangerous currents beneath its smooth surface. The older trapper removes his boots before crossing a shallow stretch, testing each step with deliberate patience. You follow carefully, feeling icy water push firmly against your legs. Halfway across, you nearly lose your footing. The current surprises you. One careless step becomes two. Then a steady hand catches your arm before balance disappears completely. Neither of you says much afterward. No lecture is needed. You understand. Many mountain men never survive such mistakes. Historical evidence from surviving journals consistently shows that accidents caused by rivers, falls, weather, and exposure claimed countless lives throughout the fur trade era. Scholars examining frontier records at Princeton University have emphasized that ordinary environmental hazards often proved far more dangerous than dramatic confrontations described in popular folklore. Yet historians still debate the exact proportion of deaths caused by natural accidents compared with disease. Since surviving records remain incomplete and sometimes contradictory, as evening approaches, clouds gather unexpectedly above the western peaks. Their grey shapes grow heavier with surprising speed. Only an hour ago the sky appeared perfectly clear. Mountain weather changes quickly, sometimes frighteningly quickly. The older trapper wastes no time. Camp must be prepared before rain arrives. Horses are secured beneath sturdy trees. Firewood is stacked beneath a simple covering. Blankets are protected from moisture using carefully folded hides. Preparation feels almost routine. Experience makes it so. Large drops begin striking leaves overhead before you finish arranging your own bedding. Within minutes, steady rain sweeps across the valley, filling the air with the rich scent of wet earth and fresh pine bark. Smoke from the campfire curls low beneath the damp air before disappearing among dark branches. You sit quietly beneath shelter, listening. Rain possesses its own rhythm. The forest changes with it. Small streams begin flowing where none existed before. Tree trunks darken with moisture. Tiny frogs emerge from hidden places. The entire landscape seems to breathe differently. The storm also changes your thoughts. You begin appreciating simple craftsmanship in ways that settled life rarely encourages. A well-made blanket means restful sleep instead of dangerous exposure. A carefully stitched pair of moccasins keeps feet dry another week. A dependable rifle represents security, hunting, and survival all at once. Ordinary objects become extraordinary companions. As darkness settles around camp, conversation remains gentle. One trapper quietly repairs leather straps using bone needles and sinew. Another smooths the wooden handle of a hatchet worn shiny by years of use. Every motion feels practiced, calm, almost meditative. No one wastes effort. The frontier discourages waste. You think about how different this education feels compared with formal learning back east. There are no blackboards, no examinations, no graduation ceremonies. The mountains examine you every single day instead. The results arrive immediately. Did you read the weather correctly? Did you preserve enough food? Did you choose safe ground before pitching camp? Each answer determines tomorrow. Research, highlighted by historians at the University of California, has suggested that practical environmental knowledge accumulated by trappers became one of the most valuable forms of expertise carried into later exploration and settlement. Even so, scholars continue discussing how much of that knowledge developed independently and how much depended upon lessons generously shared by indigenous communities who had understood these landscapes for countless generations. The rain gradually fades after sunset, leaving only droplets falling from branches overhead. Cool air settles across the valley. The fire crackles steadily once again, sending the comforting aroma of wood smoke drifting through camp. You warm your hands. The heat feels welcome. Across the clearing, your damp boots rest beside glowing embers, slowly drying for tomorrow's journey. Beyond the firelight, the forest disappears into darkness, though it no longer feels quite as mysterious as it did yesterday. Not because the wilderness has changed, because you have. Only a little, but enough to notice. The mountains are already teaching you their quiet language. One careful lesson at a time, and somewhere beyond the next ridge, countless more lessons are patiently waiting beneath towering pines, winding rivers, and endless skies. You rise with a deeper respect for the land than you possessed when this day began. Tomorrow, that respect will be tested again, for a moment. It feels as though the forest itself is watching you. The morning air is cool enough that every breath hangs briefly before fading into the quiet light. Dew clings to tall grass, soaking the edges of your moccasins as you walk. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker taps patiently against an old pine, while the distant sound of flowing water echoes through the valley with comforting familiarity. The land feels peaceful, yet it is far from empty. Long before American trappers entered these mountains, countless indigenous communities had already developed rich cultures perfectly adapted to the western landscape. Rivers that appear unfamiliar to newcomers have carried families for generations. Mountain passes that seem impossible to locate are remembered through stories shared across centuries. Plants overlooked by strangers provide medicine, food, or useful fibers. Every season brings changes already well understood by those who call this country home. You begin to understand something important. The mountain man does not truly discover this wilderness. He enters it. That realization changes everything. As you continue westward, your small party notices thin columns of smoke rising beyond a grove of cottonwood trees. No one rushes forward. No one reaches immediately for a weapon. Experienced travelers know that caution and respect often accomplish more than fear. The horses slow naturally. Voices become quieter. Even the sound of leather creaking beneath saddles seems unusually loud. Soon, several figures emerge from the trees. Their movements appear calm and confident. They study your group with the same careful attention that your companions offer in return. For a few quiet moments, neither side speaks. Instead, everyone observes clothing, horses, expressions, and intentions. Trust begins silently. Only afterward do gestures replace uncertainty. Greetings are exchanged with measured courtesy. Small gifts follow, a little tobacco, a useful knife, perhaps a handful of dried berries offered without expectation. Simple exchanges, important ones. Throughout the Mountain Man era, relationships with indigenous nations vary enormously depending upon location, circumstance, previous encounters, and individual personalities. Some partnerships become lifelong friendships. Others remain cautious business arrangements. Occasionally, fear, misunderstanding, or competition leads to violence that leaves lasting sorrow for everyone involved. There is no single story. There never was. You spend several days near this community, and every hour teaches lessons unavailable anywhere else. One experienced hunter demonstrates how to recognize weather changes by studying cloud movement across distant ridges rather than focusing only upon conditions overhead. Another explains why certain valleys remain warmer during early spring because mountain winds follow predictable patterns invisible to unfamiliar travelers. The knowledge feels astonishing. It also feels practical. Nothing is taught simply for curiosity. Every lesson has purpose. You accompany several hunters into the surrounding hills. Their pace differs from anything you have previously experienced. They rarely force themselves forward. Instead, they move with the rhythm of the landscape itself. They pause often. They listen carefully. They notice birds changing direction before larger animals appear. They recognize subtle disturbances among leaves that your own eyes completely overlook. Patience becomes a skill, not merely a virtue. At midday, everyone rests beside a clear stream flowing over smooth stones. The water tastes wonderfully cold after hours of walking beneath warm sunshine. Nearby, strips of fresh meat slowly roast above a small cooking fire, releasing a rich aroma that mixes pleasantly with the scent of cedar and sage, carried by a gentle breeze. You eat quietly. No one seems eager to fill every silence. The wilderness rarely encourages unnecessary conversation. Instead, people watch the surrounding country with relaxed attention. Children gather edible plants growing near the water. Older members repair clothing using careful stitches that seem almost effortless after years of practice. Laughter occasionally rises through camp, warm and genuine without disturbing the peaceful afternoon. Ordinary moments reveal extraordinary resilience. You gradually recognize that survival here depends upon generations of accumulated experience rather than individual brilliance. Every useful trail, every dependable water source, every seasonal campsite reflects countless observations patiently remembered and shared across time. Modern historical research strongly supports this understanding. Scholars at Stanford University have emphasized that much of the environmental knowledge later used by American trappers originated through cooperation, observation, and direct learning from indigenous communities across the West. At the same time, historians continue debating exactly how much credit early frontier narratives gave to native expertise, since many popular accounts later focus primarily upon the achievements of individual mountain men. The older trapper travelling with you quietly acknowledges this reality one evening while repairing a worn saddle strap. "We would never have lasted alone." His words remain simple. Their meaning runs deep. You think about every skill acquired during recent weeks, reading weather, crossing rivers, identifying edible routes, locating hidden springs, finding safe winter shelter. Much of this knowledge reached mountain men through relationships patiently built across cultural boundaries. History often celebrates dramatic events. Daily cooperation deserves equal attention. As autumn gradually approaches, preparations for colder weather become increasingly important. Members of the nearby community begin preserving food with remarkable efficiency. Meat dries carefully above slow fires. Berries are gathered before early frosts arrive. Animal hides are cleaned, stretched, and softened until they become warm clothing capable of surviving harsh winters. The work never seems hurried, only steady. Everyone understands that winter rewards preparation made during gentler seasons. You assist where possible, though your hands still lack the effortless confidence of experienced craftsmen. Soft leather resists your clumsy stitches. Cord slips unexpectedly from tired fingers. More than once, you quietly remove uneven work and begin again. Learning requires humility. The mountains insist upon it. One crisp morning, you accompany an elder walking through a meadow bright with late summer flowers. He pauses frequently, pointing toward plants that appear nearly identical to your inexperienced eyes. One nourishes the body, another eases pain, a third should never be eaten. Small differences matter enormously. You listen carefully. The cool breeze carries the earthy fragrance of drying grass while insects drift lazily through warm afternoon sunlight. Far above, snow already rests upon distant peaks despite the comfortable temperature below. Winter is watching. It simply has not arrived yet. Research associated with the University of California has shown that indigenous ecological knowledge represented one of the most sophisticated systems of environmental understanding in North America, built through careful observation across many generations. Even so, scholars still debate how fully later American society recognized the depth and complexity of this knowledge, especially during the rapid expansion that followed the fur trade era. Eventually, it becomes time to continue your journey. Parting feels surprisingly emotional. You arrived as strangers. You leave carrying shared memories. Hands are shaken warmly. Quiet farewells replace long speeches. A few practical gifts are exchanged before horses are loaded once more. The trail stretches westward beneath a bright autumn sky. As you ride away, you glance back only once. Smoke rises gently above the trees. Then the forest slowly closes behind you. The lessons remain, not only lessons about survival, but lessons about respect. The wilderness belongs to no single traveller. Every path carries older footsteps. Every river remembers earlier voices. Every mountain has witnessed generations whose stories deserve to be remembered alongside those of the famous trappers who later crossed these remarkable lands. The journey ahead remains uncertain, but you no longer travel with empty hands. You carry knowledge generously shared, and that knowledge may one day save your life. Your mind drifts towards another quiet morning beneath towering pines. The air feels noticeably colder now, carrying the unmistakable promise of autumn. A faint layer of frost sparkles across fallen leaves, disappearing slowly as the first rays of sunlight reach the valley. Every breath feels crisp. Every sound seems sharper. Even the steady footsteps of your horse echo differently across the frozen ground. The seasons are changing, so must you. Life beyond the settlements follows a rhythm unlike anything found in towns along the eastern seaboard. There are no courthouse clocks announcing the hour, no market bells calling merchants to work, no familiar neighbours waving from tidy front porches. Instead, the mountains keep time. Sunrise begins the day. Darkness ends it. Everything between those moments depends upon weather, animals, rivers, and endurance. You break camp with practiced movements that already feel more natural than they did only weeks ago. The blanket is folded tightly. The cooking pot is cleaned with sand and river water. Every remaining ember is buried beneath cool soil. Leaving a careless fire behind could destroy an entire valley long after you've disappeared beyond the next ridge. Small habits matter. Responsible habits matter even more. The morning trail climbs steadily through dense forests where sunlight filters between tall branches in narrow beams. The scent of pine resin fills the cool air, mixed with damp moss and decaying leaves returning quietly to the earth. Somewhere above, squirrels chatter angrily at your slow progress, while distant ravens glide across the pale sky without making a sound. The wilderness rarely feels silent. It simply speaks softly. By late morning, your companions stop beside a narrow creek where everyone settles into familiar routines. One man sharpens an axe using smooth circular strokes. Another checks the leather straps securing heavy packs. A third carefully cleans his rifle. Removing moisture before rust has the opportunity to begin its patient work. Maintenance never ends. Out here, neglected equipment can become as dangerous as any storm. You soon discover that a mountain man's day consists largely of ordinary tasks performed extraordinarily well. Popular stories often celebrate dramatic encounters with bears or desperate escapes through snow-covered passes. Yet most days pass in quieter ways. Boots need repair, clothing needs mending, food must be prepared, horses require constant care, traps demand inspection. The fire must always be ready before darkness falls. There is dignity in repetition. The older trappers never complain about these routines. In fact, they seem comforted by them. Familiar work creates order inside an unpredictable world, even after a difficult journey. Repairing a torn blanket or oiling a rifle remind you that some things remain within your control. As the afternoon unfolds, you begin preparing fresh buckskin gathered several days earlier. The process demands patience rather than strength. Every scrap of flesh must be removed carefully. The hide is stretched evenly. Smoke from slow-burning wood eventually helps preserve the leather while giving it the familiar scent that lingers on nearly every experienced mountain man. The work stains your hands. No one minds. When finished properly, soft buckskin protects against cold winds remarkably well, while remaining flexible enough for endless miles of walking. A poorly prepared hide stiffens quickly, cracks in freezing weather, and becomes nearly useless. Craftsmanship keeps you alive. Nearby, another trapper quietly reshapes a damaged wooden snowshoe in preparation for the coming winter. Steam rises gently from heated wood as he bends it into the proper curve. His hands move without hesitation, guided by years of experience rather than written instructions. You watch closely. Every movement teaches something. The camp itself remains surprisingly simple. Blankets hang across low branches to dry in the afternoon sun. Saddles rest upside down upon logs. Strips of meat sway gently above a smoky fire where they slowly become food that may last for weeks. Nothing appears decorative. Everything has purpose. Even the smallest possessions carry stories. A worn cup may have crossed countless rivers. A patched coat may have survived several winters. A knife with a polished handle has probably prepared thousands of meals. Objects become companions. Their value cannot be measured by appearance alone. As evening approaches, someone begins preparing supper. A pot filled with venison, wild onions, and gathered roots simmers slowly above glowing coals. The rich aroma spreads through camp, blending pleasantly with wood smoke and the earthy smell of damp leaves. After hours of steady labour, even such a modest meal feels deeply satisfying. You eat slowly. There is no rush. Conversation drifts comfortably between practical matters and quiet memories. One trapper recalls an unusually harsh winter when snow buried entire camps beneath towering drifts. Another remembers a horse that somehow found its own way back after disappearing during a violent storm. No one exaggerates for attention. The stories are enough. Many happened exactly as remembered. Research examined by scholars at Columbia University has emphasized that surviving journals from mountain men reveal lives dominated by ordinary labor rather than constant adventure. Daily records often focus on weather, repairs, hunting success, and travel conditions instead of dramatic confrontations. At the same time, historians continue debating how later novels and popular illustrations transform these practical workers into larger-than-life heroes, sometimes overshadowing the quieter realities preserved in original documents. The stars begin appearing one by one as twilight settles across the valley. The temperature drops quickly after sunset, reminding everyone that winter is steadily approaching. You pull your blanket closer while adding another piece of dry pine to the fire. Its warmth feels immediate. Its light feels reassuring. Across the clearing, horses stand quietly with slow clouds of breath drifting into the cold evening air. Their steady presence brings comfort. A dependable horse is more than transportation. It carries food, equipment, precious furs, and sometimes the exhausted trapper himself after weeks of difficult travel. Few partnerships become stronger. You take a moment to examine your own hands in the firelight. The skin has become rougher than when this journey began. Small cuts have healed into faint scars. Your fingernails still hold traces of earth despite repeated washing in cold streams. The wilderness leaves its mark. Not only on the body, you notice changes within yourself as well. You no longer hurry without reason. You pay attention to the wind before choosing a campsite. You instinctively search for dry firewood before resting. The habits of settled life slowly fade, replaced by quiet awareness. Historians associated with the University of Oxford have observed that many mountain men gradually adapted not only their practical skills, but also their entire way of thinking, learning to judge time, distance, and success according to the rhythms of the natural world. Even so, scholars still debate how completely these men embraced frontier life, since many eventually returned to towns after the fur trade declined. For now, however, there is no thought of leaving, only tomorrow's journey. The fire burns lower as the night deepens. Smoke rises straight into the clear sky, carrying the comforting scent of cedar, somewhere beyond the edge of camp. An owl calls softly into the darkness. The sound echoes through the trees before fading into silence. You settle beneath your blanket. The ground feels firm but familiar. Above you, countless stars quietly watch over another peaceful night in the mountains. Tomorrow will bring more work, and somehow that feels exactly right. In your ears, the echo changes into the steady murmur of a broad river long before you actually see it. The sound grows deeper with every step until the trees finally part, revealing a ribbon of moving water stretching far beyond the curve of the valley. Morning sunlight dances across its surface, breaking into thousands of bright reflections that seem almost alive. Cool air rises from the current, carrying the clean scent of fresh water mixed with damp willow branches and smooth river stones. The river feels ancient. It also feels inviting. To a newcomer, it appears to be little more than beautiful scenery. To a mountain man, however, it is something much greater. A river provides drinking water, fish, transportation, landmarks, fertile campsites, and perhaps most importantly, direction. Long before reliable maps covered the American West, rivers became the highways that guided travelers through immense and unfamiliar country. You pause along the bank, watching driftwood float quietly downstream. The water never stops, neither do the people who depend upon it. Throughout the first decades of the 19th century, rivers such as the Missouri gradually became the lifelines of the expanding fur trade. Flatboats, keelboats, and later other sturdy vessels carried supplies westward, while returning east loaded with valuable pelts. Every successful expedition relied upon these waterways. Even when strong currents transformed ordinary travel into exhausting labour, you soon discover that moving upstream demands remarkable determination. Men step into the cold water, leaning forward as ropes stretch tight across their shoulders. Every careful footstep pulls a heavily loaded boat against the relentless current. Mud clings stubbornly to boots. Hidden rocks threaten twisted ankles. Mosquitoes gather eagerly wherever movement slows. Progress comes slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. You imagine spending an entire day advancing only a handful of miles. The effort feels almost unbelievable from a modern perspective. Yet thousands of men accepted this exhausting routine because rivers offered the safest and most reliable routes through enormous landscapes where roads simply did not exist. The Missouri seems almost endless. Its banks constantly change. One stretch passes beneath towering cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmer softly in the breeze. Another opens into broad grasslands where bison graze peacefully beneath wide skies. Around the next bend, steep bluffs rise above the water, casting cool shadows that briefly relieve the afternoon heat. Every bend reveals something new. Every bend deserves respect. The older trapper beside you studies the current more carefully than the scenery. He notices where floating debris gathers, where whirlpools quietly form beneath the surface, and where sandbars shift after recent storms. What appears random to inexperienced eyes follows patterns shaped by seasons, rainfall, and the river's endless patience. He points toward a narrow channel. That way. Only later do you understand why. The wider route looks easier but hides shallow gravel capable of trapping heavily loaded boats. The narrower passage appears risky, yet offers deeper water and a safer crossing. Experience often means choosing the path that merely seems more difficult. You remember that lesson. It applies beyond rivers. As the journey continues, smaller waterways begin feeding into larger ones, creeks become streams, streams become rivers. Together they weave an intricate network connecting distant mountain valleys with settlements hundreds of miles away. The landscape itself seems connected. Nothing truly stands alone. By midday, you reach a quiet section where beaver have transformed the surrounding country through years of patient labour. Small dams slow the current, creating ponds that reflect the bright autumn sky like polished glass. Young willow shoots line the banks where fresh teeth marks reveal recent activity. Nature reshapes nature. Patiently, a trapper explains that healthy beaver populations often improve the surrounding environment in surprising ways. Slower water encourages new plant growth. Birds gather around sheltered ponds, fish find calmer places to rest. Even larger animals frequently visit these areas in search of dependable water. The beaver changes more than rivers. It changes entire landscapes. Modern environmental research has increasingly recognized this remarkable influence. Scholars at the University of California have highlighted how beaver engineering created wetlands that supported remarkable biological diversity across Western ecosystems. Yet historians and environmental scientists continue debating the full extent to which intensive trapping during the fur trade altered regional waterways before conservation efforts emerged many decades later. You continue following the river until the afternoon sun begins sinking lower behind distant hills. Along one broad shoreline, fresh hoof prints cover the damp sand. Some belong to horses, others clearly belong to elk. Still others remain unfamiliar even after several weeks of careful observation. The frontier never stops teaching. You simply become a better student. Later, while gathering firewood, you notice pieces of driftwood polished smooth by years of flowing water. Each log tells a silent story. Perhaps it once stood high upon a mountain slope before storms carried it into distant streams. Perhaps spring floods transported it hundreds of miles before leaving it here beside your boots. The river remembers journeys, just as people do. Camp is established on a gently rising bank safely above the waterline. Experienced travellers avoid camping too close to rivers despite their obvious convenience. Overnight storms far upstream can suddenly raise water levels with frightening speed. Choosing slightly higher ground often means the difference between peaceful sleep and waking inside a flooded camp. Preparation begins before sunset. As always, the evening meal is simple but satisfying. Fresh fish caught earlier in the day cooks slowly over glowing coals while strips of dried meat warm beside the flames. The pleasant aroma mingles with the scent of cottonwood smoke drifting lazily across the water. Nearby, someone quietly repairs a paddle worn smooth after countless miles. The river reflects every flicker of firelight. Its gentle movement never ceases. Conversation eventually turns toward places farther west. Veterans describe the Yellowstone with quiet admiration, speaking of immense valleys and powerful currents. Others mention the Green River winding through spectacular country where many trappers gather during the annual rendezvous. The Snake River earns respectful silence before anyone begins describing its swift water and difficult crossings. Each river possesses its own character. Learning those personalities takes years. Research discussed by historians at Yale University has emphasized that waterways serve not only as transportation routes, but also as essential corridors for cultural exchange, trade, exploration, and communication across the early American West. Even so, historians still debate how rapidly detailed geographic knowledge spread among independent trappers compared with officially sponsored expeditions. Since much practical knowledge remained unwritten for many years, night gradually settles across the valley. Stars appear one after another, reflected so clearly upon the calm river that the water itself seems filled with light. Gentle waves lap softly against the muddy shore, while cool evening air carries the comforting smell of damp earth and fading campfire smoke. You sit quietly for a while. No words seem necessary. The river's carried explorers, traders, indigenous families, dreamers, and weary travellers for generations. Tomorrow it will continue flowing exactly as it always has, patient and steady beneath the open sky, and tomorrow you'll follow it once again, deeper into the remarkable heart of the American frontier, your eyes open before dawn, not because of an alarm, but because the wilderness has quietly trained your senses. The air carries a faint chill that slips through the edges of your blanket. Somewhere beyond the fading campfire, a horse stamps the ground and exhales a slow cloud of white breath into the darkness. The smell of cold ash mingles with fresh pine, while the first pale light begins touching the highest mountain peaks far beyond the valley. Another day begins gently. Yet today, the trail carries something different. For weeks you've heard names spoken around campfires with quiet admiration. They're never introduced with dramatic speeches. No one announces them like heroes from a storybook. Instead, their names appear naturally during ordinary conversation, usually followed by a thoughtful pause. Someone once crossed that impossible pass. Someone survived that brutal winter. Someone discovered a safer river crossing. The names remain. The stories grow. One of the first figures whose reputation reaches your ears is John Colter. Although his greatest adventures belong to an earlier generation, his experiences continue inspiring nearly every trapper travelling west. After serving with the famous expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, Colter chose not to return permanently to settled life. Instead, he ventured back into the immense wilderness almost alone, exploring valleys, rivers, and mountains that few Americans had ever seen. His journeys seem almost unbelievable. Even today, stories about Colter circulate from camp to camp. Some describe his remarkable endurance. Others tell of narrow escapes through dangerous country. A few accounts have clearly grown larger with repeated telling. As frontier stories often do, that happens everywhere. Not only here. Modern historians generally agree that John Colter became one of the earliest American mountain men, though accounts of several dramatic episodes remain difficult to verify completely because surviving evidence is limited. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago has emphasized Colter's importance as an early explorer whose observations expanded geographic understanding of the northern Rocky Mountains. Yet historians still debate which legendary tales surrounding his life reflect documented events and which were gradually enlarged through oral tradition. The uncertainty somehow makes him even more fascinating. You continue westward, climbing steadily into higher country where forests become thicker and the air noticeably cooler. The trail narrows between towering spruce trees, whose branches filter the morning sunlight into long green ribbons across the forest floor. The mountains feel closer now. They also feel larger. Around midday, your party encounters an older trapper travelling alone with 2 pack horses. His buckskin clothing bears countless careful repairs. His beard has turned almost completely grey. Deep lines surround his eyes, carved there by decades of snow, sunlight and wind. He greets everyone warmly, without unnecessary ceremony. As the horses graze nearby, conversation naturally turns toward familiar names from the fur trade. Someone mentions Jedediah Smith, and the older trapper smiles quietly before staring toward the distant mountains. "He never stopped moving," he says. The words carry admiration. Jedediah Smith earns respect for qualities extending well beyond physical endurance. He becomes known for remarkable discipline, careful observation, and an unusual willingness to explore country that many others hesitate to enter. Time after time, he travels through unfamiliar regions, recording routes that later guide countless emigrants heading west. His courage feels deliberate, not reckless. Unlike popular legends that celebrate fearless adventurers charging blindly into danger, surviving journals suggest something rather different. Successful mountain men usually calculate risks with extraordinary care. They survive because they prepare thoroughly, remain observant, and know when caution matters more than speed. That lesson repeats often, for good reason. As afternoon light softens across the valley, the older trapper shares memories of another respected figure, Jim Bridger. Even during his younger years, Bridger gains a reputation for astonishing knowledge of Western geography. Rivers, mountain passes, hidden valleys, and winter camps gradually become fixed within his remarkable memory. He rarely needs a map. The land itself becomes his map, listening beside the fire. You realize something important about these legendary men. None of them work entirely alone. Every successful journey depends upon companions, indigenous guides, trading partners, dependable horses, and lessons patiently learned from countless previous travelers. The legend belongs to one person. Success rarely does. The evening brings welcome warmth after a cool day in the mountains. Venison slowly roasts over glowing coals while someone stirs a pot of thick stew scented with onions and wild herbs gathered nearby. Wood smoke drifts lazily upward, carrying tiny sparks into a sky gradually filling with stars. You settle comfortably beside the fire. Stories continue. One trapper recalls meeting William Ashley during the early years of organised Western expeditions. Ashley's business model transforms the fur trade by sending trapping parties deep into the mountains, rather than waiting for indigenous traders to deliver pelts to distant posts. The idea changes the rhythm of frontier commerce and eventually helps create the famous annual rendezvous system. Innovation sometimes looks surprisingly simple, until it changes everything. Research associated with Harvard University has shown that William Ashley's business strategies played a significant role in reshaping the Rocky Mountain fur trade during the 1820s by encouraging greater mobility among trapping parties. At the same time, historians continue debating whether Ashley's commercial innovations alone explain the rapid growth of the rendezvous system, or whether broader economic conditions made such changes almost inevitable. The discussion gradually shifts toward Kit Carson, though he belongs slightly later than some of the older legends now surrounding the campfire. Younger trappers admire his remarkable ability to travel immense distances, communicate across cultures, and adapt to constantly changing conditions throughout the West. His reputation grows steadily. Not overnight. You begin noticing a pattern shared by nearly every respected mountain man. Their greatest strength is not extraordinary courage, it is consistency. Day after day, season after season, they rise before sunrise, maintain their equipment, study weather, care for horses, observe rivers, respect experience. These ordinary habits eventually create extraordinary lives. As the fire burns lower, you glance around the quiet camp. Weathered faces glow softly in the orange light. Boots dry beside carefully stacked firewood. Rifles rest within easy reach, cleaned and protected against the night's moisture. Horses graze peacefully nearby beneath a sky crowded with brilliant stars. The camp feels calm, almost timeless. You understand that legends do not begin as legends. They begin exactly like this, with ordinary mornings, careful choices, patient learning, and thousands of unnoticed decisions repeated across difficult years. History remembers the remarkable moments. Life consists mostly of the quiet ones. Scholars at Princeton University have frequently observed that surviving letters and journals from frontier explorers reveal far more attention to weather, supplies, travel conditions, and practical challenges than later popular biographies often suggest. Even so, historians still debate how much of the mountain man's enduring image reflects historical reality, and how much was shaped by 19th century popular literature seeking larger-than-life heroes for a growing nation. The fire settles into glowing embers. The valley grows silent. High above, the mountains remain exactly where they have always stood, patient witnesses to every trapper, explorer, family, and traveller who has crossed their rugged slopes. Tomorrow you will continue following their trails, not merely searching for beaver, but searching for understanding. Because every mile reveals that the greatest legends of the American frontier were never only about brave men. They were also about the remarkable land that quietly shaped them all, for a brief moment. The morning feels almost too peaceful to disturb. Thin clouds drift lazily across a pale blue sky, while sunlight settles gently upon a meadow sparkling with frost. The horses graze without concern, pulling at dry grass that survived the first cold nights of autumn. A light breeze carries the pleasant scent of sage mixed with damp earth, and somewhere beyond a stand of aspens, a stream whispers softly over smooth stones. The wilderness appears welcoming. Appearances can be wonderfully misleading. By now you have learned that the American frontier rarely announces danger with dramatic fanfare. More often, trouble arrives quietly. A loose rock beneath one careless step, a sudden change in the wind, an overlooked storm gathering beyond distant mountains. The wilderness rewards attention long before it rewards courage. That lesson returns today. You begin climbing a narrow trail that winds upward through thick timber. Fallen needles soften every footstep, making the forest unusually quiet. The air grows noticeably cooler with each increase in elevation. As you pause to catch your breath, one of the older trappers raises a hand. He says nothing. Everyone stops. Silence spreads naturally through the group. At first, you wonder what has captured his attention. Then you notice the horses. Their ears stand sharply forward. One animal lifts its head, nostrils flaring as it studies the forest ahead. The horses know first. They often do. Several moments pass before you hear it. A low rustling, heavy, deliberate. Not far away, the older trapper slowly points toward a cluster of berry bushes where branches sway, although no wind reaches them. Out from the shadows steps an enormous grizzly bear, its thick fur glowing deep brown beneath the morning sun. The animal is magnificent. It is also dangerous. Nobody reaches immediately for a rifle. That surprises you. Experience has taught these men that panic often creates the very danger they hope to avoid. Instead, everyone remains calm, voices stay low, movements remain slow and predictable. The bear pauses, studying your small group with equal curiosity. For several long moments, neither side advances. The forest itself seems to stop breathing. Then, after sniffing the air one final time, the great animal turns quietly back into the trees, disappearing almost as silently as it appeared. Only then do shoulders relax, breaths deepen, conversation returns. The older trapper smiles faintly. Best fight is the one that never begins. Simple words, hard-earned wisdom, historical records from the fur trade era frequently describe encounters with grizzly bears. Though many ended far less peacefully than this one, modern researchers examining frontier journals at the University of California have noted that experienced trappers generally avoided unnecessary confrontations whenever possible because injuries in remote country could easily become fatal. Yet historians continue debating how many dramatic bear stories published during the 19th century reflected actual events, and how many were exaggerated for eager readers back east. You continue climbing through increasingly rugged country where the trees gradually thin, revealing sweeping views across endless valleys below. The air becomes noticeably thinner. Every breath requires slightly more effort. The mountains test everyone equally. Youth offers no exemption. As afternoon approaches, dark clouds begin gathering behind distant peaks with surprising speed. Only an hour earlier, the sky appeared almost perfectly clear. Now cold winds race down narrow valleys, carrying the sharp scent of approaching snow. No one hesitates. Camp must be prepared immediately. Blankets are secured beneath waterproof hides. Firewood is gathered while it remains dry. Horses are led towards sheltered ground, protected from the strongest winds. Preparation outruns panic. Always. The first snowflakes begin falling before the fire is fully lit. At first they drift lazily through the air, almost beautiful against the dark evergreen branches. Then the snowfall grows heavier until the surrounding forest gradually disappears behind a curtain of white. Visibility shrinks. The world grows smaller. You wrap your blanket tightly around your shoulders while extending cold hands toward the growing fire. Smoke swirls unpredictably beneath shifting gusts, carrying the comforting aroma of burning pine throughout camp. The warmth feels precious, almost miraculous, outside the circle of firelight. Snow continues covering every familiar landmark. Animal tracks vanish. The trail disappears. Rocks become hidden beneath fresh powder capable of twisting an ankle with one careless step. The storm changes everything. For 2 days your party remains sheltered beside a rocky outcrop while snow piles steadily across the surrounding slopes. Supplies are carefully rationed. Horses receive constant attention despite the difficult weather. Every morning someone clears accumulating snow before it grows dangerously heavy upon makeshift shelters. No one complains. Complaining changes nothing. Instead, routines provide stability. One trapper repairs clothing beside the fire. Another carefully dries damp boots before they freeze overnight. Someone quietly prepares hot broth using dried meat and preserved vegetables. The meal is simple, yet its warmth spreads through tired bodies with comforting effectiveness. Small comforts become unforgettable. When the storm finally passes, brilliant sunshine returns almost without warning. Fresh snow blankets the mountains in dazzling white, reflecting light so intensely that you instinctively narrow your eyes. Every tree branch sparkles beneath tiny crystals. The cold air smells astonishingly clean. The landscape looks transformed. It is also more dangerous. Hidden beneath smooth snowdrifts lie fallen logs, narrow streams, and sharp rocks waiting patiently beneath the surface. Travel slows considerably as everyone probes uncertain ground before committing each step. Caution saves energy. Energy saves lives. Later that afternoon, another challenge emerges. One packhorse slips while crossing an icy slope, sliding awkwardly toward a cluster of rocks below. Several men react immediately, securing ropes before the frightened animal can fall farther. Working together with remarkable calm, they gradually guide the exhausted horse back onto firmer ground. No shouting, no panic, only careful teamwork. Watching the rescue reminds you once again that survival here rarely depends upon dramatic individual heroics. Success grows from preparation, patience, cooperation, and countless practical decisions made correctly day after day. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has emphasized that environmental hazards such as severe weather, accidents, and exposure consistently pose greater risks to mountain men than many later fictional portrayals suggested. Even so, historians still debate the relative importance of different dangers because surviving journals naturally recorded only the experiences of those fortunate enough to return. That thought lingers quietly. How many stories disappeared forever? How many names vanished with the snow? As evening settles across the frozen valley, the fire once again becomes the center of your small world. Wet gloves hang drying beside glowing coals. Steam rises gently from a pot of thick stew. Outside, the snow reflects pale moonlight so brightly that the mountains seem almost luminous beneath the stars. The silence feels deeper now, almost sacred. You understand that danger is not the enemy of the mountain man. Carelessness is. Nature does not seek revenge. It simply follows its own rules. Those who learn those rules may survive for many seasons. Those who ignore them often become little more than forgotten footprints beneath the next snowfall. You settle beneath your blanket once again, grateful for the warmth of the fire, the companionship of experienced travellers, and another day safely completed in the immense wilderness. Tomorrow, the mountains will offer new challenges. They always do. Your breathing settles into the slow rhythm of another autumn morning as the trail descends from the high country. Frost still clings to patches of grass hidden beneath the shade of towering pines, but the valleys below already glow beneath gentle sunlight. The crisp mountain air carries the familiar scent of wood smoke from your breakfast fire, mixed with the earthy fragrance of damp leather and freshly cut willow branches packed onto the horses. For days, everyone has spoken about the same destination, not with excitement alone, with anticipation. The annual rendezvous waits somewhere beyond the next chain of valleys, where isolated trappers from across the Rocky Mountains gather after months of solitude. For much of the year, a mountain man may encounter only a handful of people while travelling through vast wilderness. The rendezvous changes everything. For a short time, the frontier becomes crowded. You follow a well-used trail winding beside the Green River. Unlike many of the quiet paths you have travelled before, this one bears countless signs of recent traffic. Fresh horse tracks overlap older ones. Wagon wheels have left deep impressions in soft ground near stream crossings. Broken branches reveal where heavily loaded pack animals brushed against the forest. Everyone seems to be heading the same way. The wilderness suddenly feels connected. As the afternoon unfolds, you begin meeting small groups of travellers arriving from different directions. Some wear buckskin darkened by years of smoke and weather. Others lead long strings of pack horses loaded with carefully bundled pelts. A few are merchants dressed in heavier wool clothing, their saddlebags filled with goods meant for eager customers. Smiles appear more often now. Even strangers greet one another warmly. Months of isolation make ordinary conversation feel surprisingly valuable. One elderly trapper laughs quietly after shaking hands with an old friend. "I thought winter finally caught you." The reply comes with equal humour. It nearly did. The exchange lasts only seconds, yet you sense genuine affection beneath the light-hearted words. Shared hardship creates lasting friendships. Late in the day, the trail climbs a final ridge before opening into an enormous valley alive with activity. Hundreds of horses graze across broad meadows. Smoke rises from dozens of campfires scattered beside the river. Brightly coloured trade blankets flutter gently in the afternoon breeze. The sound of voices, laughter, hammering, and distant fiddle music drifts across the open ground. The rendezvous has begun. It feels almost like another world. After weeks surrounded mainly by rivers, forests, and mountains, the gathering seems astonishingly lively. Traders unpack barrels filled with powder, lead, coffee, sugar, tobacco, and cloth. Blacksmiths repair damaged traps, axes, and horseshoes. Skilled craftsmen sharpen knives while leather workers replace worn saddles and harnesses. Everywhere you look, business unfolds. But commerce tells only part of the story. Mountain men greet companions they have not seen since the previous year. Some exchange warm embraces, others quietly compare the past season's journeys. They speak about rivers crossed, storms survived, animals trapped, and friends who sadly failed to return. Not every reunion is joyful. Some conversations grow unexpectedly quiet. A familiar name receives no answer. The absence itself becomes the reply. You realize that every gathering also honors those whose trails ended somewhere beyond the mountains. Their stories survive because someone remembers telling them beside another campfire. Memory becomes a form of respect. As evening approaches, the marketplace grows even busier. Beaver pelts are carefully examined before changing hands. Experienced traders judge quality through touch almost as much as sight. Thick, well-prepared pelts earn better prices than damaged ones. Every successful season now becomes visible in carefully stacked bundles waiting beside trading tents. The Beaver has travelled far. Its journey is not finished. From these valleys, pelts will eventually move eastward through an expanding network of traders until they reach workshops producing fashionable hats for customers who will never imagine the rugged country where the fur first originated. The connection feels extraordinary. So does its distance. Historical research associated with Harvard University has emphasized that the annual rendezvous system transformed the Rocky Mountain fur trade by bringing supplies directly to trappers instead of requiring long returns to eastern trading posts. This innovation dramatically reduced travel time and encouraged deeper exploration of the western mountains. Even so, historians still debate whether the rendezvous emerged primarily from commercial necessity or from the practical realities of operating across such immense and isolated landscapes. As darkness gradually settles across the valley, business gives way to celebration. Campfires multiply beneath the clear sky. Someone begins playing a fiddle while others clap gently in time with familiar tunes. Laughter spreads easily from one gathering to another. Stories become longer. Coffee simmers in blackened pots above glowing coals, filling the cool evening air with its rich aroma. For once, no one hurries to sleep. There is too much to share. You wander through the gathering, listening more than speaking. Veterans describe mountain passes crossed during terrible blizzards. Younger trappers eagerly ask questions about unexplored valleys farther west. Merchants quietly negotiate future expeditions, while scouts discuss changing conditions along distant trails. Knowledge flows as freely as trade, perhaps even more freely. One conversation catches your attention. Several experienced mountain men spread a worn paper map across a flat log, carefully marking rivers, campsites, dangerous crossings, and reliable springs discovered during the previous season. The map slowly improves, not through government surveys alone, but through countless individual journeys. Research discussed by scholars at Yale University has highlighted the important role played by trappers in expanding practical geographic knowledge of the American West. Many routes later followed by emigrants, military expeditions, and surveyors first became widely known through information exchanged during gatherings much like this one. Historians still debate exactly how much of this knowledge remained informal for years before eventually appearing on published maps. The fire beside your own camp burns brightly as friends old and new gather together for one final meal before tomorrow's trading resumes. Thick stew bubbles gently inside a heavy iron pot, while fresh bread warms near the edge of the coals. The comforting smell of roasted meat blends with wood smoke and crisp autumn air. You feel something unexpected, belonging. For months, the wilderness has taught independence. The rendezvous quietly reminds you that even the most capable mountain man remains part of a much larger community, connected by trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. The stars shine brilliantly above the crowded valley. Horses rest peacefully after long journeys. Fires flicker like tiny constellations spread across the open grassland. Laughter rises softly before fading into the cool night. Tomorrow, business will continue. Soon afterward, everyone will once again disappear into different rivers, forests, and mountain ranges. But for these few precious days, the lonely trails of the American frontier meet in one remarkable place, and the mountains seem just a little less lonely. Your thoughts linger beside the fading campfires of the rendezvous as another cool morning settles over the valley. The cheerful noise of the previous evening has softened into quieter sounds. Horses pull gently at fresh grass still wet with dew. Iron pots clink softly as breakfast is prepared. Thin columns of blue smoke rise almost perfectly straight into the calm autumn sky, carrying the warm scent of coffee, wood smoke, and freshly baked bread. The gathering feels different now, less like a celebration, more like a community. As you wander through the waking camp, you notice something that many popular stories about mountain men rarely mention. Families are everywhere. Children chase one another across open meadows. Mothers prepare meals beside campfires. Babies sleep peacefully beneath carefully stitched blankets, while older relatives repair clothing or tend horses nearby. The frontier is not inhabited by trappers alone. It never truly was. Many mountain men eventually build lives that stretch beyond solitary travel. Some marry women from eastern settlements after leaving the mountains. Many others form lasting partnerships with native women whose knowledge, resilience, and cultural understanding become essential parts of family life across the West. These relationships shape the frontier, quietly, profoundly. You're invited to share breakfast with one such family. The father spent many years trapping along the Green and Snake rivers before gradually dividing his time between seasonal expeditions and raising children. His wife grew up among an indigenous community whose ancestors had known these valleys for countless generations. Their home is simple. Their lives are remarkably rich. Fresh bread warms beside the fire while venison slowly cooks in an iron pan. The children laugh as they help gather water from a nearby stream, carefully carrying heavy buckets between them. The youngest proudly places extra firewood beside the cooking area, eager to contribute despite being too small to lift the larger logs. No one dismisses the effort. Every helping hand matters. As you eat together, conversation moves easily between practical concerns and family memories. The father speaks about difficult winters in the mountains. His wife gently corrects part of one story, reminding him that he nearly became lost during a spring flood because he ignored advice about changing river conditions. Everyone laughs, including him. The lesson remains affectionate rather than embarrassing. Marriage on the frontier often demands remarkable flexibility. Long trapping seasons separate families for months at a time. Dangerous journeys carry no guarantee of return. Yet these households demonstrate extraordinary resilience. Built upon cooperation rather than rigid expectations, the children grow up learning from both parents. That becomes their greatest strength. A young boy easily identifies animal tracks impressed into damp soil while his sister confidently gathers edible plants growing along the edge of the meadow. They speak naturally about rivers, weather, horses, and changing seasons with an ease that surprises you. The wilderness is simply home. Nothing more, nothing less. Modern historical scholarship increasingly recognizes the importance of these multicultural frontier families. Research discussed by scholars at the University of California has shown that marriages between mountain men and native women often created enduring economic, cultural, and social partnerships that strengthen trade networks across the West. At the same time, historians continue debating how fully earlier frontier histories acknowledge the central role played by indigenous women in shaping these communities. The omission becomes obvious once you begin paying attention. Throughout the day, you observe countless examples of shared responsibility. While several men inspect traps requiring repair, women prepare preserved foods for the coming journey. Older children care for younger siblings while grandparents quietly pass along stories that preserve family history. Everyone teaches. Everyone learns. There is no clear boundary between work and education. Skills pass naturally from one generation to the next through daily experience rather than formal instruction. You spend part of the afternoon walking beside a woman gathering medicinal plants along a gently sloping hillside. She pauses frequently, explaining which leaves ease fever, which roots calm stomach pain, and which flowers should never be touched carelessly. The distinctions appear subtle. The consequences are not. She smiles when you confuse two nearly identical plants. You only make that mistake once. The gentle humour eases your embarrassment. By the time the sun begins lowering toward the western mountains, you realize how incomplete your understanding of frontier life had once been. Popular legends often celebrate lonely heroes standing against nature with little more than courage and determination. Reality proves far richer. No mountain man truly succeeds alone. He depends upon companions, trading partners, experienced guides, welcoming communities, reliable horses, and very often, devoted families who provide stability in an unpredictable world. That realization changes your perspective. As evening approaches, several families gather beside a broad campfire where supper is slowly cooking. Thick stew bubbles gently while fresh fish roasts above glowing coals. The delicious aroma mingles with the sweet fragrance of burning cottonwood and the cool scent of the nearby river. Children settle quietly beside older relatives. Stories begin. One elder recalls seasons when beaver seemed almost endless along distant streams. Another remembers crossing a mountain pass during an unusually mild winter. A grandmother laughs while describing the awkward mistakes made by inexperienced trappers arriving from eastern cities, completely unprepared for frontier realities. Everyone listens, even the youngest children. These stories entertain, but they also preserve practical knowledge. Hidden inside every humorous memory lies advice about weather, travel, respect, or survival. History lives around the fire, not only inside books. Research associated with Columbia University has emphasized that family networks played a far greater role in frontier stability than earlier popular narratives often suggested. Domestic life, cooperation across cultures, and shared labor formed essential foundations for many Western communities. Even so, historians still debate how frontier myths emphasizing rugged individualism overshadowed the quieter realities preserved in family records and community traditions. Night settles gently across the valley. The stars appear one by one above the dark silhouettes of distant mountains. Nearby, a baby sleeps peacefully while parents continue quiet conversation beside the fire. Horses stand calmly beyond the circle of light, their slow breathing blending with the soft murmur of the river. The scene feels wonderfully ordinary. That is precisely what makes it remarkable. You understand now that the history of the American mountain man is not only the story of lonely trails, frozen rivers, or daring exploration. It is also the story of homes created wherever kindness, cooperation, and trust could flourish. Even in the wilderness, perhaps especially there, the fire burns lower as families gradually retire beneath warm blankets. Gentle laughter fades into comfortable silence. Above you, countless stars continue their patient journey across the night sky, watching over another peaceful evening in the remarkable world of the American frontier. Tomorrow, the trail will lead once more into unknown country, but tonight you carry something more valuable than supplies. You carry the memory of people who turned the wilderness into home. For a little while, it feels as though the mountains themselves are inviting you forward. The morning sky is brilliantly clear after several days of calm weather. Sunlight pours across broad valleys, turning distant peaks into glowing walls of gold and pale blue. A cool breeze carries the sharp scent of spruce mixed with dry stone, while somewhere below, a winding river reflects the sky like polished glass. The trail ahead is unfamiliar. That is exactly why you follow it. The great age of the American mountain man is not only defined by trapping, it is also an age of exploration. Every season, experienced travelers push beyond valleys they already know, searching for better trapping grounds, easier mountain crossings, safer winter camps, and shorter routes between distant rivers. Curiosity becomes practical. Discovery becomes survival. You climb steadily through a narrow pass where loose stones shift beneath your boots. The air grows noticeably thinner, making each breath slightly deeper than the last. Your horse slows naturally, conserving energy without any command. The mountains set the pace. You simply accept it. Reaching the crest shortly before midday, you stop almost instinctively. The view is astonishing. Before you stretches an enormous basin filled with forests, meadows, sparkling streams, and winding rivers disappearing toward distant horizons. Layers of mountain ranges fade into soft blue silhouettes, one behind another, until they merge almost completely with the sky. No map prepared you for this. Few maps could. You remove a folded sheet of paper from your pack. The rough map contains rivers, several known campsites, and a handful of mountain passes gathered from previous travellers. Yet as you compare the drawing with the landscape before you, you quickly notice large empty spaces. Blank areas remain, many of them. Those empty places remind you that much of the American West remains imperfectly understood by people living in eastern cities. Entire valleys await careful description. Rivers twist through country never accurately measured. Mountain ranges hide passes that may someday guide thousands of emigrants. Today they guide only a few. The older trapper beside you kneels on a flat rock and quietly studies the surrounding country. He points toward a distant ridge where snow still lingers despite the warmth below. That pass stays open longer. The observation sounds simple. It represents years of experience. Successful exploration rarely depends upon dramatic inspiration. Instead, it grows from patient observation repeated season after season. Which slopes lose snow first? Which valleys collect dangerous fog? Which streams remain dependable during dry summers? Small answers create great journeys. As the afternoon continues, your party carefully descends into the unknown basin. Every mile requires close attention. Fallen trees force unexpected detours. Hidden marshes complicate travel. Narrow streams that seem insignificant on paper become surprisingly difficult obstacles after recent rain. Nothing behaves exactly as expected. The land always has the final word. You stop beside a small spring bubbling quietly from beneath a cluster of smooth rocks. The water tastes wonderfully cold, carrying a faint mineral flavour unlike the rivers you crossed only yesterday. Nearby, bright wildflowers continue blooming despite the approaching autumn. You mark the location carefully. Someday another traveller may need it. This simple act captures an important truth about frontier exploration. Knowledge rarely belongs to one person for long. Safe campsites, reliable water sources, mountain passes, and sheltered valleys gradually become shared information, passed from one expedition to another through conversation, journals, and carefully improved maps. Every traveller adds something, even something small. Historical research examined by scholars at Yale University has emphasized that practical geographic knowledge accumulated through countless trapping expeditions significantly expanded understanding of the Rocky Mountain region long before many formal government surveys reached the area. Yet historians continue debating exactly how much early exploration depended upon informal information shared among trappers compared with official expeditions sponsored by public institutions. As evening approaches, you discover evidence that others have passed this way before. An old fire ring rests beneath several weathered pines. Nearby, a tree bears faint axe marks almost hidden beneath years of new growth. Someone camped here. Long ago. The discovery feels strangely comforting. You're exploring unfamiliar country, yet you're not entirely alone in history. Others have paused beneath these same trees, watched the same sunset, and listened to the same evening breeze moving through the branches. The mountains remember everyone, even when people forget. Camp is established beside a quiet meadow bordered by tall aspens, whose leaves shimmer softly in the cooling air. Their golden colour signals that autumn is steadily advancing. The gentle rustling overhead sounds almost like distant rain. You gather dry branches while another trapper prepares supper. Soon the rich smell of roasting venison fills the clearing, blending with wood smoke and the sweet fragrance of fallen leaves warming beside the fire. The meal is simple. The setting is extraordinary. After eating, several companions begin discussing routes further west. One believes another valley may provide easier access through the mountains. Another argues that the southern route remains safer during early snowfall. Neither speaks with certainty. Experience teaches humility. Research associated with Princeton University has observed that frontier journals frequently reveal cautious decision-making rather than reckless adventure. Explorers often compared multiple possible routes before committing themselves, fully aware that a poor choice could cost valuable supplies or even lives. Historians still debate how later frontier literature gradually transformed this careful planning into tales emphasizing fearless spontaneity. The contrast feels important. Real courage includes caution. As darkness settles across the basin, the stars emerge with astonishing clarity. Without city lights to soften the heavens, the night sky seems almost impossibly crowded. Countless points of light stretch from horizon to horizon, while the cool mountain air carries only the faint scent of pine and the occasional crackle of burning wood. You lie back for a moment, simply looking upward. It becomes easy to understand why so many mountain men remained in the West long after they had earned enough money to return east. The wilderness offered more than opportunity, it offered perspective. Out here! The concerns that seemed overwhelming in crowded towns often faded beside landscapes measured not in miles alone, but in entire horizons. Tomorrow you'll continue exploring valleys that remain little known beyond the frontier. Some discoveries may eventually appear on printed maps. Others may survive only through stories exchanged beside distant campfires. Either way, every careful step expands human understanding just a little farther. And beneath these endless mountains, that feels like a remarkable privilege. Your attention settles upon the steady rhythm of horses walking across open grassland as another peaceful morning unfolds beneath the wide western sky. Thin clouds drift slowly overhead, casting broad shadows that move almost lazily across the rolling hills. The crisp air carries the scent of dry sage, worn leather, and yesterday's campfire, while somewhere in the distance a meadowlark greets the sunrise with a clear, cheerful song. The wilderness feels timeless, yet powerful forces are quietly changing it. After many weeks beside rivers and mountains, it becomes easy to imagine that the fur trade exists only through the hard work of individual trappers. You have watched men check trap lines before dawn, repair worn equipment beside evening fires, and carry heavy bundles across difficult country. But another world exists beyond the mountains, a world of ledgers, contracts, investments, competition. The frontier may seem wild, yet is deeply connected to business decisions made hundreds or even thousands of miles away. You begin the day's journey alongside a small caravan heading toward a temporary trading camp. Several pack horses carry tightly bundled beaver pelts, wrapped carefully against unexpected rain. Others transport supplies destined for trappers who have spent months deep in the mountains. Nothing travels empty. Every load has value. The older trader leading the caravan speaks with quiet confidence rather than dramatic enthusiasm. He has spent years balancing risk against reward. Every expedition requires careful planning. Powder, lead, blankets, tools, coffee, salt, cloth, and food must all reach distant camps before winter closes the passes. A delayed shipment affects everyone. The mountains rarely forgive poor timing, as the caravan follows a winding trail through broad valleys. The trader explains that success depends upon far more than finding beaver. A profitable season requires dependable transportation, trustworthy partners, accurate information, healthy horses, and enough financial support to survive years when weather or changing animal populations reduce trapping success. Business demands patience. So does the wilderness. You begin realizing that many famous mountain men are also practical businessmen, whether they think of themselves that way or not. Every pelt must be carefully prepared before reaching market. Damaged fur earns lower prices. Poorly preserved pelts may become nearly worthless after long journeys. Quality matters, every single time. By midday, the caravan reaches a lively trading camp positioned beside a broad river crossing. Unlike the Great Rendezvous, this gathering is much smaller, yet activity fills every corner. Traders examine bundles of fur while clerks quietly record transactions inside weathered account books. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron into useful tools, sending bright sparks dancing through the afternoon air. The steady ringing echoes across the valley. It sounds almost comforting. Nearby, wagons loaded with supplies slowly arrive from eastern settlements, barrels of flour, sacks of salt, coils of rope, and heavy crates of manufactured goods are carefully unloaded before being sorted according to future destinations. Nothing happens by accident. Every shipment has already been planned. You notice that experienced merchants spend as much time talking as trading. They exchange news about weather conditions, river levels, shifting beaver populations, and rumors concerning distant trapping grounds. Information has value, sometimes more than fur. One merchant quietly lowers his voice while discussing changing fashion in eastern cities. Demand for certain styles appears to be shifting, Although beaver hats remain highly desirable, subtle changes in clothing preferences may eventually influence prices throughout the entire trade network. The wilderness feels very far away. Fashion still reaches it. Modern economic historians have emphasized that the Rocky Mountain fur trade formed part of an increasingly interconnected international marketplace. Research discussed by scholars at Columbia University has shown that changing consumer preferences in Europe and the eastern United States could significantly affect commercial decisions deep within the American West. Yet historians continue debating how quickly frontier traders actually received reliable information about distant market conditions. Given the slow pace of communication during the early 19th century, the delay creates uncertainty. Everyone must make educated guesses. During the afternoon, you accompany the trader while he inspects several newly arrived bundles of pelts. His hands move carefully across each one, feeling thickness, softness, and overall condition before offering a price. He rarely speaks immediately. Experience teaches patience. One younger trapper grows visibly disappointed after learning that several damaged pelts will earn less than expected. Rather than criticizing him, the trader quietly explains how moisture weakened the fur during transport. It is an expensive lesson, hopefully only once. Watching the exchange, you understand that business relationships on the frontier depend heavily upon reputation. A merchant known for fairness attracts loyal customers. A trapper recognized for honesty earns trust even during difficult negotiations. Character becomes currency. Difficult to earn, easy to lose. Later that afternoon, you wander beyond the busiest part of camp where several wagons stand ready for the long journey east. Teamsters inspect wheels, grease axles, tighten harnesses, and carefully balance heavy loads before departure. The work appears repetitive. It is absolutely essential. One broken axle hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement may delay valuable cargo for weeks. A poorly secured load can destroy months of labour before reaching market. Tiny details matter enormously. Research associated with the University of Chicago has highlighted the remarkable logistical complexity of the early Western fur trade. Successful companies coordinated transportation, seasonal timing, supply distribution, and financial investment across immense distances long before railroads transformed American commerce. Historians still debate which business innovations contributed most significantly to sustaining profitable operations in such challenging conditions. As evening approaches, merchants gradually close their account books while trappers finish exchanging goods. Fresh supplies replace worn equipment, coffee, sugar, powder, and lead disappear into carefully packed saddlebags. Tomorrow everyone leaves. The camp already feels temporary. A warm supper gathers travellers around several shared fires. Thick slices of roasted venison are passed from hand to hand, while fresh biscuits bake inside heavy iron ovens. The comforting aroma drifts through cool evening air mixed with wood smoke and the faint scent of horses resting nearby after long days on the trail. Conversation becomes thoughtful, less hurried now. One experienced merchant reflects quietly upon the changes already unfolding across the frontier. More settlers continue arriving each year. New trading posts appear along rivers that once saw only occasional visitors. Trails gradually widen beneath increasing traffic. The West is changing, slowly but undeniably. You listen without interrupting. The mountain man often seems like the central figure in frontier history. Yet tonight you understand that he exists within a much larger system connecting wilderness, commerce, transportation, politics, and distant cities. Every trapline reaches farther than it appears. Every river carries more than water. The fire burns steadily as darkness settles across the trading camp. Above you, countless stars quietly shine over wagons, horses, merchants, and trappers alike. Tomorrow each group will once again follow different roads toward different destinations, yet all remain connected. By business, by necessity, and by the remarkable web of relationships quietly shaping the history of the American West. Your thoughts drift into the quiet hours before sunrise, when the world feels suspended between darkness and light. The campfire has settled into a bed of glowing coals that give off more warmth than flame. A faint breeze moves gently through the pine branches above, carrying the clean scent of resin mixed with cool mountain air. Somewhere beyond the edge of camp, a slow river continues its patient journey, sounding almost like steady breathing beneath the stars. No one speaks yet. No one needs to. The wilderness has taught you that silence is rarely empty. It is filled with distant birds preparing for dawn, horses shifting their weight as they rest, leaves brushing softly against one another, and thoughts that seldom find room inside the busy settlements far to the east. This is the hour when memory arrives. Without invitation, you watch one of the older trappers sitting quietly beside the fading fire. His weathered hands cradle a warm cup of coffee, but he barely drinks it. Instead, he stares into the glowing embers with an expression that seems both peaceful and distant. He is somewhere else, not in place, in time. You eventually sit beside him without interrupting the silence. After several minutes, he smiles gently, almost surprised to find another person awake. "I was thinking about home." The words come softly, almost like a confession. You ask whether he misses it. He considers the question for a long moment. Every day. Then he pauses. And not at all. The answer seems impossible. Until you understand. Many mountain men carry two different lives inside them. One belongs to the settlements where parents, siblings, old friends, or children may still wait. The other belongs entirely to the wilderness, where every sunrise brings freedom, uncertainty, and purpose that cannot easily be explained to people who have never crossed the Rockies. Neither life completely replaces the other. Instead, they coexist. That quiet tension shapes countless decisions. As the morning light gradually spreads across the valley, your companions begin preparing breakfast. Someone grinds coffee beans using a small hand mill. Another slices dried meat into a pot already simmering above the fire. The rich aroma of coffee blends with wood smoke and the comforting smell of warm broth. The familiar routine feels grounding, almost sacred. While eating, conversation remains thoughtful rather than lively. One trapper mentions receiving a letter nearly 2 years earlier, carried west through an extraordinary chain of traders and travellers before finally reaching him. By then, everything had changed. The news was already old. Another quietly admits that he has not seen his younger brother in nearly a decade. He wonders whether the boy has become a father by now. No one knows. The frontier stretches farther than miles alone. Distance becomes measured in missed birthdays, changing seasons, and faces remembered more clearly than they can now be imagined. Modern historians examining surviving correspondence have noted that communication between mountain men and eastern settlements was often irregular and painfully slow. Research discussed by scholars at Princeton University has emphasized that many trappers lived for months or even years with little reliable news from family members. Yet historians continue debating how deeply this isolation affected different individuals. Since surviving journals reveal remarkably varied emotional responses, some embraced solitude, others quietly endured it. The trail today follows a high ridge overlooking endless forests below. Cool wind brushes gently across your face, while scattered clouds drift slowly overhead. From this height, the wilderness appears almost limitless, stretching toward distant horizons where mountain ranges fade into pale blue mist. The view inspires wonder. It also inspires reflection. You begin asking yourself questions that would rarely arise in crowded towns. What truly makes a successful life? Is wealth measured by money alone? Can freedom become its own kind of home? The mountains never answered directly. They simply provide space for such questions. During the afternoon, your party stops beside a small alpine lake so clear that every surrounding tree reflects perfectly upon its still surface. The water lies untouched by even the slightest breeze. No ripples. Only quiet. One trapper removes a small folded paper from inside his pack. It is worn thin from repeated handling. You notice him reading it carefully before returning it to its protective wrapping. A letter. Nothing more. Everything more. He notices your curiosity and smiles. My daughter wrote this years ago. The paper has travelled hundreds of miles. So have his memories. He admits that he carries the letter everywhere, even though he already knows every word by heart. Some things weigh almost nothing, yet become impossible to leave behind. As evening approaches, gentle rain begins falling across the valley, not a violent storm, just a quiet, steady rainfall that fills the air with the earthy fragrance of wet moss, damp pine needles, and fresh stone. Camp is established beneath a rocky overhang offering natural shelter. Soon the fire burns brightly despite the weather, its smoke drifting lazily into the cool evening air. Rain softens every sound. The world grows calmer. Conversation turns toward faith, though no one argues about beliefs. One man quietly thanks Providence for another safe journey through dangerous country. Another simply removes his hat for a moment before supper, speaking no words at all. Each man carries hope differently. The mountains allow room for both certainty and doubt. Research associated with Yale University has suggested that frontier diaries often reveal deeply personal expressions of belief shaped by hardship, gratitude, and prolonged isolation rather than formal religious practice alone. Even so, historians continue debating how representative surviving journals truly are. Since many mountain men left few written records describing their private spiritual lives, some thoughts remain unwritten. Perhaps they always should. The rain gradually stops before nightfall. Mist rises gently from the surrounding forest while droplets continue falling from pine branches in slow, steady rhythms. The scent of wet cedar fills the cool air. You step beyond the firelight for a moment. The darkness feels peaceful. Above the thinning clouds, stars slowly begin returning one by one. You realize that solitude has quietly changed you. Not by making you lonely, but by teaching you to enjoy your own thoughts without fearing silence. That may be one of the wilderness's greatest gifts. The older trapper who spoke about home earlier smiles once more before wrapping himself inside his blanket. I suppose, he says softly, a person can belong to more than one place. Then he closes his eyes. The fire crackles gently. The horses breathe quietly nearby. The mountains stand patiently beneath the returning stars, listening without judgment to every hope, every memory, and every dream carried into their timeless valleys. Tonight, you understand them just a little better. For a moment, it feels as though the wilderness is holding its breath. Dawn arrives beneath a sky washed with pale silver, while thin ribbons of mist drift lazily above the valley floor. The cool air smells of damp grass and fresh cedar, and the quiet crackle of your breakfast fire is joined only by the distant call of a hawk circling somewhere high above the mountains. Everything seems unchanged, yet change is already underway. You saddle your horse and continue along a familiar trail that has carried trappers for many seasons. The route feels almost comforting now. You recognize the bend where cottonwood trees lean over the river. You remember the rocky hill that offers a broad view of the valley beyond. The landscape has become a trusted companion. Then you notice something different. Fresh wagon tracks. Not one wagon, several. The deep impressions cut across the old trail, leading steadily westward. Their wheels have pressed the earth far more heavily than the horses of small trapping parties ever could. You dismount for a closer look. The tracks are recent, perhaps only a few days old. One of the older mountain men kneels beside them, studying the disturbed soil with thoughtful eyes. He says nothing at first, then he smiles, though there is a trace of sadness beneath the expression. The country is changing. No one argues. There is nothing to argue about. For many years, the mountain man has moved through lands visited only occasionally by traders, explorers, and indigenous communities. Now, new travellers begin arriving in greater numbers. Surveyors measure distances, government expeditions improve maps, Settlers seek fertile valleys where they hope to build permanent homes. The wilderness remains vast. It no longer feels quite so empty. As the morning progresses, your party overtakes a small government survey team carefully measuring distances with chains and simple instruments. Their notebooks are already filled with careful sketches of rivers, ridges, and campsites. They work methodically, patiently. One surveyor explains that accurate maps may eventually help future travellers avoid dangerous crossings and unnecessary hardship. The goal seems practical, almost modest, yet you realise that every line added to a map quietly changes history. Places once known only through memory and conversation gradually become permanent features on paper. Unknown countries slowly becomes familiar territory. Discovery becomes documentation. Documentation encourages settlement. Modern historians widely agree that government surveys played an increasingly important role in expanding knowledge of the American West during the early 19th century. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has shown that official mapping efforts often built upon information gathered earlier by indigenous communities. Explorers, traders, and mountain men. Yet historians continue debating the degree to which formal surveys relied upon practical, frontier knowledge already circulating through trapping networks. Knowledge rarely belongs to one source. It grows through many hands. Later that afternoon, you reach a broad meadow where several families have established a temporary camp while preparing for the next stage of their westward journey. Unlike the trappers you have known for so long, these travellers carry furniture, farming tools, cooking pots, and carefully packed family possessions. Their destination is not another trapping season. It is a permanent home. Children gather firewood while parents repair wagon wheels damaged during recent river crossings. Oxen graze quietly nearby, their steady strength making possible the slow movement of heavy wagons across immense distances. Everything moves deliberately. There is no other choice. You spend part of the evening speaking with one young father. He admits that he has never before crossed the Mississippi River until beginning this journey. The mountains still amaze him. They also frighten him. He asks questions about safe river crossings, dependable water sources, and early snowfalls. You answer as best you can, drawing upon everything the wilderness has taught you during recent years. Without realizing it, you have become a guide. Knowledge naturally seeks another generation. As darkness approaches, you watch the emigrant children playing beside the edge of camp. They laugh while pretending to climb imaginary mountains or cross make-believe rivers using fallen logs. To them, the frontier is not legend. It is simply childhood. That quiet realization touches you deeply. The West is changing not through one dramatic event, but through thousands of ordinary families carrying ordinary hopes. Research associated with the University of Chicago has emphasized that the growing movement of settlers across the American frontier gradually transformed regions once dominated by seasonal trapping into landscapes increasingly shaped by agriculture and permanent communities. Historians continue debating exactly how rapidly these demographic changes influence different areas. Since some mountain regions remained isolated long after nearby valleys welcomed growing settlements, the pace differs. The direction becomes unmistakable. The following morning, your journey resumes beside a river whose banks already show subtle signs of increasing travel. Trees have been cut to improve access at several crossings. Small clearings appear where camps have repeatedly been established. Narrow trails slowly widen beneath countless passing feet. The wilderness adapts. So do its travellers. You think back to the first days of your own journey, when every river seemed mysterious and every mountain pass uncertain. Now many of those same places feel almost familiar. Familiarity changes perspective. Perhaps it changes history as well. Around midday, your party reaches a ridge overlooking a broad valley stretching toward distant blue hills. Smoke rises from several scattered cabins recently built beside a winding creek. Simple structures, important symbols. Each cabin represents a family choosing permanence over movement. Gardens will soon appear beside those homes. Fences will gradually divide open meadows, schools, churches, mills, and roads may eventually follow. The frontier slowly becomes a neighborhood, one careful step at a time. Historians associated with Columbia University have observed that mountain men frequently served as guides for surveyors, soldiers, and emigrant parties because their practical knowledge of Western geography remained unmatched. Even so, scholars continue debating how many experienced trappers welcomed these changes and how many quietly recognized that expanding settlement marked the beginning of the end for their own way of life. The question lingers in your thoughts. Progress often brings loss, even when it brings hope. That evening, your camp rests beside a gentle stream flowing through golden cottonwood trees. Fallen leaves drift lazily across the water, while the setting sun paints the surrounding hills in warm shades of amber. The fire burns steadily. Coffee warms your hands. No one speaks for several minutes. The silence feels thoughtful rather than empty. You realize that the American mountain man helped open doors that countless others would eventually walk through. Exploration created opportunity. Opportunity invited settlement. Settlement gradually transformed the very wilderness that had first inspired so many restless souls. It is a quiet irony, one impossible to ignore. The stars return overhead as another peaceful night settles across the frontier. Tomorrow the trail will continue west, but the country ahead will no longer belong only to trappers, explorers, and wandering adventurers. A new chapter is already beginning, and you're fortunate enough to witness the moment when two different Americas briefly meet upon the same trail. Your breathing slows as another cool autumn dawn spreads gently across the mountains. Frost glitters along the edges of tall grass while the first rays of sunlight slowly climb the eastern slopes. A thin veil of mist drifts above a quiet stream, carrying the fresh scent of cold water, damp willow, and fallen leaves. The horses stand patiently beside camp, their warm breath rising in pale clouds that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. The wilderness still feels endless, but something important has changed. For many years, the mountain man's livelihood has depended upon one remarkable animal. The beaver has quietly shaped the routes of expeditions, the locations of camps, the fortunes of trading companies, and even the maps gradually emerging across the American West. Now, signs of change appear. Not suddenly, patiently. You follow a familiar stream where experienced trappers once expected to find several active beaver lodges every season. The water still flows peacefully between thick stands of willow and cottonwood. Birds continue singing among the branches. The landscape remains beautiful, yet something feels different. The banks are quieter. You kneel beside the water, searching for fresh evidence of beaver activity. Old dams remain partly intact, softened by weather and time. A few weathered stumps still bear the unmistakable marks of sharp teeth. But many of the recent signs that once seemed so common have disappeared. The silence tells its own story. One of the older trappers studies the stream without surprise. They've grown scarce here. His voice carries no anger, only acceptance. Years of successful trapping have gradually reduced beaver populations in many heavily worked regions. The richer streams naturally attracted the greatest attention, season after season, as profitable areas became less productive. Trapping parties pushed farther into more remote valleys. Success demanded movement. Movement became constant. The change did not happen because one expedition trapped too many animals in a single season. Instead, it unfolded slowly across decades, shaped by countless individual decisions made by people responding to strong market demand. No one intended to end an era, yet history often changes this way. Modern environmental historians have concluded that intensive trapping significantly reduced beaver populations across many parts of the American West during the height of the fur trade. Research discussed by scholars at the University of California has emphasized that the ecological effects extended beyond the animals themselves because beaver dams influence wetlands, water storage, and surrounding plant communities at the same time. Historians continue debating how quickly different regions recovered after trapping declined. Since local environmental conditions varied considerably, nature remembers, even when people move on. As the morning continues, you travel beside several streams that once supported thriving trapping camps. The older mountain men speak quietly about places they visited years earlier. This valley used to be full. I caught 20 here one spring. We hardly travelled a mile without finding fresh sign. Their memories feel genuine. The landscape no longer matches them. You realise that the wilderness is not frozen in time. Rivers change course. Forests recover after fires. Animal populations rise and fall. Even the most experienced trapper cannot assume that last year's knowledge guarantees tomorrow's success. The frontier keeps changing. Everyone else must adapt. By midday, your party reaches another familiar valley where a small trapping camp once stood. Only faint traces remain. A few weathered logs lie half buried beneath grass. The old fire ring has nearly disappeared beneath moss and fallen leaves. Nature works patiently. It rarely leaves sharp edges behind. The quiet scene encourages reflection. You think about all the men who once laughed around this forgotten campfire, discussing profitable seasons ahead without realizing how quickly circumstances would change. No one can see every ending, especially while living the middle of the story. Later that afternoon, conversation turns toward changing fashions in eastern cities. Several traders passing through recent camps have shared similar news. Silk hats are becoming more popular. Demand for beaver felt appears to be weakening. At first, the reports seem almost unbelievable. For decades, elegant beaver hats have represented wealth and refinement. Entire business empires have developed around satisfying that demand. Can fashion truly reshape the frontier? Remarkably, yes. The people making these choices rarely consider the consequences beyond their own wardrobes. A gentleman purchasing a fashionable hat in Boston or London almost certainly never imagines that changing styles may alter the lives of trappers thousands of miles away. Yet that invisible connection remains. Commerce reaches astonishing distances. Research associated with Harvard University has highlighted how changing consumer preferences during the 19th century gradually weakened the profitability of the North American beaver trade. Historians generally agree that shifting fashions combined with declining beaver populations contributed significantly to the industry's transformation. Even so, scholars continue debating the relative importance of each factor because economic and environmental changes unfolded together over many years. No single cause tells the whole story. History rarely works that way. As evening approaches, your companions establish camp beside a narrow creek sheltered by tall cottonwood trees. Fallen leaves cover the ground in shades of gold, amber and deep brown. Every gentle breeze sends another handful drifting softly toward the water. Autumn feels especially beautiful, perhaps because it quietly reminds you that every season eventually changes. Supper cooks slowly above glowing coals while the familiar scent of roasting venison blends with wood smoke and cool evening air. Conversation remains thoughtful rather than lively. One younger trapper finally asks the question everyone has been quietly considering: what happens next? The older men exchange calm glances. One smiles gently. We learn something new. The answer feels surprisingly hopeful. Many experienced mountain men have already begun adapting. Some spend more time guiding explorers and surveyors. Others assist emigrant wagon trains crossing unfamiliar country. A few establish trading posts or settle near growing frontier communities. The wilderness taught flexibility. Now flexibility becomes survival once again. You stare into the dancing firelight while considering everything the mountains have already taught you. The frontier has never promised permanence. Rivers shift. Snow falls early. Trails disappear beneath forests. Fortunes rise and fall. Perhaps the beaver trade is simply another current within that larger river of history. Scholars at Oxford University have often observed that the decline of the mountain fur trade should not be viewed merely as economic failure, but as part of a broader transformation reshaping North America during the first half of the 19th century. Historians still debate exactly when the classic mountain man era truly ended, because many veterans continued working in new roles long after the fur trade itself had diminished. The labels matter less than the people. They continued living, continued adapting, continued moving forward. The fire gradually settles into glowing embers as stars brighten above the quiet valley. The creek continues flowing beside camp exactly as it has for countless generations. Unconcerned with changing fashions or shifting markets, the water keeps moving, so does history. You wrap your blanket a little tighter against the cool night air, understanding that tomorrow's trail will lead into a different frontier than the one you first entered, not because the mountains have changed, but because the world beyond them has. Your mind drifts toward another sunrise painted across the Rocky Mountains. A pale ribbon of light slowly appears above the eastern horizon, touching snow-covered peaks before reaching the quiet valley where your small camp still sleeps. The morning air feels sharp against your face, carrying the familiar scent of pine needles, cold stone, and the faint smoke rising from last night's dying fire. Everything feels familiar, yet nothing remains exactly the same. The conversations around camp have slowly begun to change. A few years earlier, every discussion centered upon trapping grounds, beaver populations, and profitable rivers. Now, different questions fill the morning air. Which emigrant party needs a guide? Which army officer seeks an interpreter? Which survey expedition plans to cross the mountains next spring? The frontier itself is asking new questions. Experienced mountain men begin offering new answers. You finish packing your blanket before walking toward a broad meadow where several horses graze quietly beneath scattered cottonwood trees. One of the older trappers adjusts the saddle on his favourite horse with practiced hands. His movements remain calm. But today he's preparing for a different kind of journey. Not another trapping season, a guiding expedition. Several emigrant families will soon attempt a difficult mountain crossing, and they have hired him to lead the way. His knowledge has become his greatest treasure, more valuable than fur. You ride together through gently rolling hills while he explains the changing realities of life in the West. Years spent trapping have taught him every dependable spring, every dangerous river crossing, every mountain pass that remains open after early snowfall. People now pay generously for that knowledge. It can save lives. The shift feels surprisingly natural. The skills that once helped locate beaver now help protect entire wagon trains filled with children, livestock, and precious possessions. The mountains remain the same. The travellers have changed. As the morning progresses, your party encounters a long line of covered wagons slowly moving westward across an open prairie. Oxen strain patiently against heavy wooden wheels while families walk beside them, conserving the strength of their animals whenever possible. Children wave happily. Parents smile with quiet relief. Their guide rides confidently at the front of the caravan, occasionally pointing towards distant hills or changing direction to avoid marshy ground hidden beneath thick grass. Every small decision matters. One poor choice could delay dozens of families. Watching the procession, you understand that experienced mountain men have become living maps. Their memories hold information that no printed chart can fully capture. They know where water remains dependable during dry summers. They remember valleys where sudden floods follow distant storms. They recognize subtle signs announcing early winter long before snow begins falling. Knowledge cannot always be measured. Sometimes it must simply be trusted. Modern historians generally agree that former trappers played a significant role in guiding emigrant parties across the American West during the 1830s and 1840s. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has emphasized that experienced mountain men provided practical environmental knowledge unavailable through official maps alone. Yet historians continue debating how much individual guides influence successful migration, compared with the steadily improving trail systems developing throughout the same period. The truth probably includes both. History often does. Later that afternoon, you stop beside a shallow river where several wagons prepare for crossing. The water appears calm from a distance. Yet the guide studies it carefully before allowing anyone to enter. He notices everything: the angle of the current, the firmness of the riverbed, the speed of floating branches. Only after several minutes does he nod. "Cross here." The wagons move slowly into the stream. Water rises toward the wheels, swirling around sturdy wooden spokes. Oxen lean forward with steady determination while families walk beside them, holding frightened children close. The crossing succeeds, not because of luck, because of experience. You realize that countless successful journeys remain invisible to history precisely because disaster never occurred. A safe crossing leaves little drama behind. Yet it may represent the most important decision of the entire day. Quiet success rarely becomes legend. It deserves recognition anyway. By evening, the wagon train reaches a broad meadow surrounded by tall cottonwood trees. Camp quickly comes alive with purposeful activity. Fires are lit, livestock is watered, meals begin cooking, children chase one another through the grass despite the long day of travel. The atmosphere feels hopeful, different from trapping camps. Mountain men often travelled with uncertainty as constant company. These emigrant families carry something equally powerful: expectation. They are not merely passing through the wilderness. They intend to build futures within it. Research associated with Yale University has shown that experienced guides frequently served as cultural and practical bridges between the older fur trade frontier and the growing era of overland migration. Historians continue debating how deeply these men influenced patterns of settlement. Yet few question the importance of their first-hand knowledge during the great migrations westward. As darkness settles over the meadow, one young father approaches the guide carrying a simple cup of coffee. "I don't think we'd have found this place alone." The guide smiles modestly. "You would have." He pauses. "It just might have taken longer." The quiet humour brings gentle laughter from those gathered nearby. Humility seems common among the best guides, perhaps because the mountains have already taught them how small every human being truly is. Later that evening, you walk beyond the edge of camp where the stars shine brilliantly above the open prairie. Behind you, families settle beneath canvas covers while horses graze peacefully in the cool night air. Ahead, the mountains rise silently against the sky. They have watched generations come and go. Explorers, hunters, indigenous communities, traders, mountain men, now emigrants. Each leaves footprints. The mountains keep none of them forever. You reflect upon how gracefully many experienced trappers accepted these changing times. Rather than clinging stubbornly to fading opportunities, they adapted once again, just as they had adapted to rivers, weather, and wilderness countless times before. Perhaps that was always their greatest skill. Not trapping, not shooting, not even exploration. Adaptation. The frontier rewarded those willing to learn, adjust, and continue moving forward when circumstances changed beyond their control. The campfire behind you burns steadily while distant laughter gradually fades into comfortable silence. The cool breeze carries the pleasant scent of wood smoke across the sleeping meadow. Tomorrow another wagon train will continue west. Another guide will lead them safely through unfamiliar country, and the remarkable knowledge earned by the American mountain man will quietly shape another chapter in the unfolding story of the frontier. Your thoughts settle into the gentle rhythm of wagon wheels creaking across open prairie as another clear morning unfolds beneath an immense western sky. The sun rises slowly over distant hills, casting long golden shadows across tall grass, still sparkling with dew. A cool breeze brushes against your face, carrying the familiar scent of sage, damp earth, and the smoke of breakfast fires beginning to rise from dozens of camps scattered across the valley. The trail feels busier now, far busier than before. Only a generation ago, this route belonged mostly to trappers, indigenous travellers, and the occasional trading expedition. Today it carries entire communities moving steadily toward distant horizons. The Oregon Trail has become something entirely different, not simply a path, a migration. You ride near the front of a long wagon train that stretches almost beyond sight. Covered wagons roll patiently across the landscape, each one carrying furniture, family heirlooms, farming tools, seeds, clothing, books, cooking pots, and countless hopes for a different future. The journey moves slowly. Hope keeps it moving. Children laugh despite the endless miles. Mothers comfort tired infants beneath canvas covers. Fathers walk beside teams of oxen whose steady strength pulls enormous loads across rivers, plains, and mountain passes. Life continues. Even while travelling, you begin recognizing something remarkable. Much of the route beneath these wagons once existed only as narrow trails used by mountain men seeking trapping grounds or winter camps. The path has widened. Its purpose has changed. Experienced guides quietly lead the emigrants from one dependable campsite to another. Every evening they choose locations offering fresh water, grazing land, and reasonable protection from sudden weather. Their decisions appear ordinary. They are not. A poorly chosen campsite may expose hundreds of travellers to contaminated water, dangerous flooding, or scarce grazing. A wise guide often prevents hardship long before anyone realises danger existed. Quiet judgment saves lives. Again and again, as the morning progresses, your wagon train reaches a broad river crossing already familiar to several older mountain men riding alongside the emigrants. One guide studies the current before directing wagons toward a gravel bar hidden beneath the surface. Without his knowledge, the crossing would appear impossible. With it, the river becomes manageable. Families watch carefully as the first wagons enter the water. Oxen lean forward with patient determination, while muddy currents swirl around heavy wheels. The crossing succeeds. Confidence spreads. Each successful obstacle strengthens the entire company. Modern historians generally agree that mountain men played an important role in identifying and improving many sections of the Oregon Trail before large-scale migration reached its height. Research discussed by scholars at Harvard University has shown that practical frontier knowledge accumulated through years of trapping significantly contributed to safer overland travel. Yet historians continue debating how much of the final trail system emerged directly from trapping routes compared with later modifications made specifically for wagons. The difference matters. The partnership matters more. By midday, the wagon train pauses beside a broad meadow where fresh grass provides welcome grazing for weary livestock. The air fills with comforting smells. Bread bakes inside iron ovens buried beneath hot coals. Coffee simmers quietly in blackened pots. Someone roasts venison over an open fire while children eagerly wait for the meal. Simple food, hard-earned comfort. Several emigrants gather around one of the older guides, asking questions about landmarks still lying ahead. How much farther? When will we reach the mountains? Will winter arrive before we cross? The guide answers patiently, never promising certainty, only experience. The weather decides some things. His calm honesty seems more reassuring than false confidence ever could. As afternoon light softens across the prairie, you notice how differently these families view the landscape compared with the mountain men you have travelled beside. A trapper sees rivers filled with beaver. A farmer sees fertile soil. A merchant sees opportunity. A child sees adventure. The land welcomes many different dreams. That realization stays with you as the caravan continues westward beneath endless skies. Later in the day, your party encounters another experienced mountain man now working as an interpreter between emigrants and a nearby indigenous community. His calm presence helps both groups exchange information respectfully regarding safe travel routes and recent conditions along the trail. He speaks carefully. He listens even more carefully. His years spent building relationships across cultures have become just as valuable as his knowledge of rivers or mountains. Bridges take many forms. Some are built with trust. Research associated with the University of Chicago has emphasized that experienced guides and interpreters often reduced misunderstandings between travelers and indigenous communities during portions of westward migration. Historians continue debating how consistently such cooperation occurred, because experiences varied greatly depending upon region, local relationships, and changing political conditions. No single story explains every encounter, The frontier remained wonderfully complicated. Toward evening, your wagon train climbs a gentle ridge before descending into a broad valley where hundreds of cottonwood trees line a winding creek. The setting sun paints the leaves in warm shades of gold, while long shadows stretch peacefully across the grassland. Camp begins almost automatically. Wagons form protective circles. Livestock settles nearby. Children gather fallen branches. Adults prepare another shared meal. The routine has become familiar. Familiar routines create courage. After supper, one elderly woman quietly unfolds a small family Bible while several younger children gather nearby. Not everyone joins her. Some simply sit beside the fire watching sparks drift upward into the darkening sky. Different people find comfort differently. The mountains leave room for all of them. You walk beyond the campfire for a few peaceful moments, looking back. The wagons resemble tiny islands of warm light floating within an immense sea of darkness. Looking forward, the western horizon remains hidden beneath distant mountain silhouettes. The journey continues tomorrow. As always, research discussed by scholars at Columbia University has highlighted that the Oregon Trail gradually evolved from a frontier route into one of the most significant migration corridors in American history. Many of its earliest guides drew directly upon knowledge accumulated during the Mountain Man era. Even so, historians still debate how rapidly the identity of the trail shifted from a commercial pathway supporting the fur trade into a family migration route reshaping the American West. Standing quietly beneath the stars, you realize that you're witnessing one era gently giving way to another, not through sudden endings, through steady transitions. The Mountain Man has not disappeared. He has become something new. Guide, interpreter, scout, teacher. His footsteps remain beneath every wagon wheel rolling westward across the prairie. Most emigrants may never know the names of the men who first traced these routes through forests, rivers, and mountain passes. The trail remembers, and somehow that seems enough. The cool night settles peacefully across the valley while the last campfires glow softly beneath a sky overflowing with stars. Tomorrow the wagons will continue moving toward Oregon, and quietly, almost invisibly, they will continue following the legacy of the American Mountain Man. For a while, it feels as though the wind itself is carrying old memories across the mountains. The morning begins beneath a pale autumn sky where scattered clouds drift slowly above ridges that have watched generations of travelers come and go. Cool air brushes gently across your face, bringing with it the familiar scent of dry grass, weathered pine, and distant wood smoke from camps already beginning another day's journey. The landscape still looks timeless. The people moving through it no longer do. You ride along a trail that once felt almost secret. Years ago, only scattered trapping parties and indigenous travellers passed this way with any regularity. Now, the path bears the unmistakable marks of increasing traffic. Wagon wheels have widened narrow tracks, new campsites appear beside dependable springs, small cabins stand where only temporary shelters once rested beneath the trees. The wilderness is becoming settled, slowly, patiently, almost without anyone noticing from one season to the next. You pause beside a rocky overlook where an older mountain man quietly studies the valley below. His hair has turned almost completely white. Deep lines cross his face, shaped by decades of sunlight, wind, snow, and countless miles on horseback. He has seen this country change. Few people understand it better. After several quiet moments, he speaks without taking his eyes from the valley. I remember when we rode 3 weeks without seeing another camp. His voice carries no bitterness, only memory. Below, a small wagon train follows the river toward the west while smoke rises from several recently built cabins. Fields cleared for farming interrupt stretches of untouched prairie that once extended without interruption. The contrast feels striking. 2 different worlds briefly sharing the same landscape. You continue riding together through country that the old trapper knows almost by heart. Every ridge reminds him of an earlier season. Every stream recalls forgotten companions whose names survive only in fading stories shared around distant campfires. The land has become a living memory. He carries it gently. During the afternoon, you stop beside a familiar creek where beaver once flourished in remarkable numbers. Fresh willow still lines the banks, but the old trapper quietly points toward the weathered dams slowly dissolving beneath years of neglect. They're almost gone. The words barely rise above a whisper. The stream continues flowing. Nature keeps moving. Even when human stories begin fading into history, you begin understanding that the classic mountain man is slowly becoming something unusual. Not extinct, historical. The younger guides now entering the frontier often possess different backgrounds. Many learned their skills from fathers who trapped before them, but others arrived through military service, government surveys, or growing Western settlements. The profession evolves, as everything else does. Modern historians generally agree that by the early 1840s, the great era of independent mountain trapping had entered its final phase. Research discussed by scholars at Yale University has emphasized that declining beaver populations, changing fashions, and expanding settlement gradually reshaped the economic foundations of frontier life. Yet historians continue debating exactly when the classic mountain man era truly ended, because many experienced veterans remained active in different occupations for years afterward. Perhaps eras never truly end. They simply change names. Later in the day, you encounter a younger traveller who eagerly asks the old trapper about life during the Great Rendezvous years. Were the stories true? The old man smiles. Some of them. He laughs softly before continuing. And some grew taller every time they were told. The answer feels wonderfully honest. He describes long winters beside frozen rivers, friendships formed through hardship, dangerous mountain crossings, and evenings when laughter around a campfire seemed more valuable than gold. He also remembers hunger, loneliness, exhaustion. The stories include both. Reality usually does, as evening approaches. The trail passes an abandoned trading post. Its weathered log walls still stand. Though the roof has partially collapsed beneath years of snow and rain, tall grass grows through the doorway where merchants once negotiated prices with eager trappers returning from distant valleys. Silence fills the building now. History leaves quietly. You step inside for a moment. Dust settles across rough wooden shelves that once held coffee, powder, cloth, and tools carried hundreds of miles into the mountains. Nothing remains for sale, only echoes. The place feels strangely peaceful rather than sad. It reminds you that every generation builds something meaningful, even if later generations eventually build something different. Research associated with Stanford University has highlighted that many frontier trading posts experienced dramatic changes as migration patterns shifted away from the fur trade toward permanent settlement. Historians continue debating how rapidly these commercial centers declined, because some successfully adapted by serving emigrants, while others gradually disappeared altogether. Adaptation remains the frontier's oldest lesson. Outside, the setting sun paints the abandoned building with warm golden light. For a brief moment it almost appears alive again, then evening deepens. The illusion fades. Camp is established beside a quiet river whose gentle current reflects the first stars appearing overhead. Dinner cooks slowly above glowing coals, while the familiar aroma of roasted meat blends with cool autumn air and the comforting scent of cottonwood smoke. Conversation remains gentle, unhurried. Several younger travelers listen respectfully as the older trapper shares stories of companions who never became famous, despite living remarkable lives. One rescued friends from a freezing river. Another discovered a mountain pass later used by countless emigrants. A third quietly shared food during a desperate winter, saving several men from starvation. No monuments honor them. The mountains remember anyway. You find yourself thinking less about legendary names and more about ordinary people whose quiet courage rarely appeared inside newspapers or books. Perhaps history depends upon the most. Scholars at Princeton University have frequently observed that surviving frontier records reveal thousands of individuals whose contributions remained largely local, yet proved essential to exploration. transportation, and settlement. Even so, historians continue debating how popular memory gradually narrowed public attention toward only a handful of famous personalities while overlooking the broader community that made frontier life possible. The fire burns lower. The river keeps flowing. The old trapper wraps himself inside his blanket before glancing once more toward the dark outline of distant mountains. "They'll still be here." He smiles. "Long after we're gone." No one answers. None is needed. The stars brighten overhead while the wilderness settles into peaceful silence. You understand now that the final free wanderers are not disappearing because they have failed. They are passing their knowledge forward. The frontier they helped reveal has begun welcoming new generations with different dreams, and somewhere beneath every new trail, every homestead, and every western town, the quiet footsteps of the mountain man still remain. Your breathing settles into the quiet rhythm of another peaceful evening as the western sky slowly turns from brilliant gold to deep violet. The last light of the day lingers across distant mountain peaks, while a gentle breeze stirs the tops of cottonwood trees beside a calm river. The familiar scent of wood smoke drifts lazily through the cooling air, mixing with damp earth and the faint sweetness of drying grass. The journey has carried you far, farther than miles alone can measure. When you first stepped beyond the edge of the settled world, the American frontier appeared almost limitless. Rivers seemed without names, mountain passes disappeared into mystery. Every sunrise promised another unknown landscape waiting beyond the next ridge. Now those same places feel different, not smaller, better understood. You sit quietly beside the fire, watching glowing embers settle into soft crimson light. Around you, companions prepare for another peaceful night, though many of them now travel as guides, scouts, interpreters, or settlers rather than full-time trappers. The world continues moving. So do they. As you reflect upon everything you have witnessed, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The greatest legacy of the mountain man is not measured only in the number of beaver pelts collected or rivers explored. It is measured in knowledge. Knowledge patiently earned, knowledge generously shared. Long before detailed government maps covered the Rocky Mountains, mountain men carried entire landscapes inside their memories. They knew where snow lingered longest. They remembered hidden springs that never failed during dry summers. They recognized mountain passes safe enough for horses yet impossible for wagons. They understood which valleys welcomed early grass each spring and which streams became dangerous after distant storms. Their maps lived inside experience, not paper. Eventually, those memories became trails. Those trails became roads. Those roads became communities. The transformation happened gradually enough that few people living through it fully recognized the scale of what they were witnessing. History often unfolds quietly. You think about the Oregon Trail stretching westward beneath thousands of wagon wheels. You remember government surveyors carefully improving maps. You recall merchants building trading posts where isolated camps once stood. Behind each of those stories stands another. The mountain man. Modern historians generally agree that the practical knowledge gathered by trappers significantly influenced later exploration and migration across the American West. Research discussed by scholars at Columbia University has emphasized that first-hand environmental experience frequently complemented official surveys during the nation's westward expansion. Yet historians continue debating exactly how much credit should be assigned to individual explorers compared with the collective knowledge shared among indigenous communities, trappers, traders, guides, and survey expeditions. Perhaps the frontier was always a shared achievement. No single person discovered the West. Many people gradually came to understand it together. As morning arrives the following day, your journey continues through a broad valley where signs of permanent settlement become increasingly common. Fence pastures stretch across land where herds of elk once wandered undisturbed. Small orchards have begun taking root beside newly built cabins. Children's laughter drifts through the cool morning air, while smoke rises peacefully from stone chimneys. Life has changed, yet echoes remain. An older farmer pauses from repairing a fence when he notices your party passing nearby. After exchanging friendly greetings, he quietly mentions that the trail beside his property originally followed the route shown to early settlers by a mountain guide many years before. We still use it, every season. The path survives, even if its creator's name does not. The observation lingers in your thoughts throughout the afternoon. How many ordinary pieces of daily life began with someone whose story gradually faded into memory? A dependable bridge, a safe river crossing, a mountain pass, a spring hidden beneath thick cottonwood trees. These quiet contributions rarely become famous. Their importance remains enormous. Research associated with Harvard University has highlighted that infrastructure across the expanding American West frequently followed routes first identified through exploration connected to the fur trade era. Historians continue debating how extensively later transportation systems preserved original trapping paths, because many routes evolved through repeated improvement over several decades. History leaves footprints. Sometimes wagon wheels simply deepen them. By late afternoon, your companions stop atop a broad ridge overlooking an immense landscape stretching toward distant blue mountains. Rivers shimmer beneath the setting sun. Tiny farms dot the valleys below. Thin trails connect settlements that did not exist only a generation earlier. The view feels familiar. It also feels entirely new. You remember standing upon another ridge long ago when blank spaces covered much of every map. The wilderness then seemed impossibly mysterious. Now mystery has not disappeared. It has simply moved further away. The mountains still hold secrets. They always will. As evening settles across the high country, conversation around the fire turns toward younger generations growing up in western settlements. Many children know mountain men only through family stories. To them, the great trapping years already feel like distant history. Time moves quietly. It never asked permission. One elderly guide smiles while stirring the evening stew. Maybe that's how it should be. He explains that every generation deserves the opportunity to build something new, rather than endlessly repeating what came before. The thought feels comforting, not sad. Research discussed by scholars at the University of Chicago has suggested that public memory of the mountain man gradually shifted during the late 19th century, transforming practical frontier workers into enduring cultural symbols of independence and exploration. Yet historians continue debating how closely those popular images reflected the complicated realities preserved within journals, letters, trading records, and family histories. The legend grew. The real people remained wonderfully human. Night settles peacefully across the mountains once more. The fire crackles gently while the cool breeze carries the comforting aroma of cedar smoke through camp. Horses graze quietly nearby, their steady breathing blending with the soft murmur of the river below. You look upward. The same stars shine above you that guided generations of travelers before your own journey began. Explorers watch them. Indigenous families watch them. Mountain men watch them. Settlers watch them now. The sky belongs to everyone. As the last flames settle into glowing embers, you realize that the true legacy of the American mountain man cannot be confined to museums, monuments, or famous names. It survives wherever curiosity leads someone beyond familiar horizons. It survives whenever knowledge is shared freely. It survives in every trail that helps another traveler find the way. And tomorrow, as your journey reaches its final chapter, you will discover that some legacies never truly fade. They simply become part of the landscape itself. For a final moment, it feels as though the mountains have been waiting for you all along. Dawn arrives slowly, washing the highest peaks with soft golden light before the valleys below awaken. The cool air carries the familiar scent of pine, damp earth, and the last traces of last night's fire. A nearby stream continues its quiet song, flowing with the same patient rhythm that has accompanied your journey across forests. Rivers, plains, and towering ridges. The wilderness has not changed. You have, when this journey began. You stepped beyond the last settled towns into a world that seemed almost impossibly vast. Every unfamiliar trail promised uncertainty. Every distant mountain invited questions. Every river demanded respect. Now, after years measured in seasons rather than calendars, those same landscapes feel almost like old friends. You know the sound of approaching weather before the clouds gather overhead. You notice fresh tracks where once you would have seen only mud. You instinctively search for high ground before making camp. The mountains have quietly become teachers, and you have become their patient student. You ride one final time through a broad valley where morning mist lingers above the grasslands. Cottonwood leaves shimmer gently in the breeze, while a herd of elk grazes peacefully along the edge of a distant meadow, somewhere above. An eagle circles effortlessly against the pale blue sky. Everything feels calm, wonderfully calm. Yet beneath this peaceful scene lies nearly half a century of remarkable history. Between 1800 and 1845, the American mountain man helped connect an expanding nation with landscapes that many citizens could scarcely imagine. These men crossed rivers without bridges, climbed mountains without surveyed roads, and entered valleys that existed only as blank spaces on incomplete maps. They trapped beaver because the world demanded fur. They explored because curiosity and necessity often walk together. They adapted because survival required it. Modern historical research consistently recognizes the importance of the mountain man era within the broader story of American westward expansion. Scholars at Oxford University have emphasized that the knowledge accumulated by trappers, guides, explorers, and indigenous communities collectively reshaped geographic understanding of the trans-Mississippi West. Yet historians continue debating exactly how different groups influenced one another throughout this period, reminding us that history rarely belongs to a single hero or a single community. That feels appropriate. The frontier was never built alone. As you continue riding, you pass places that have quietly transformed over the years. A former trapping camp has become a small settlement. A narrow footpath has widened into a dependable wagon road. A lonely river crossing now welcomes steady travellers moving west in search of new beginnings. Children play beside cabins. Farmers work fertile fields. Merchants greet passing wagons. Life continues growing. It is easy to imagine that the mountain man has disappeared from this new world. But look more closely. The safe river crossing follows the route he once discovered. The wagon trail crosses the mountain pass he patiently explored. The settlement stands beside the dependable spring he remembered every season. His name may be forgotten. His knowledge remains. Perhaps that is the quietest form of immortality. Not statues, not monuments. Useful memories passed from one generation to the next. You pause beside a familiar overlook where your journey seemed to begin so long ago. Before you stretches the immense American West, no longer empty, yet still breathtaking beyond words. Rivers continue winding through forests. Snow still rests upon distant summits. Evening shadows still gather beneath ancient cliffs exactly as they always have. The mountains never hurried, neither did history. You think about John Colter venturing beyond the known frontier. You remember Jedediah Smith patiently recording difficult routes through unfamiliar country. You recall Jim Bridger carrying entire landscapes within his remarkable memory. You remember countless unnamed trappers whose stories survived only because companions repeated them beside evening fires. History remembers some names. The land remembers all footsteps. Research discussed by scholars at Stanford University has observed that many frontier achievements resulted from accumulated practical experience rather than isolated moments of discovery. Historians continue debating individual accomplishments, but there is broad agreement that the American West became better understood through the combined efforts of indigenous communities. Mountain men, explorers, traders, guides, surveyors, and settlers working across several generations. The story was always larger than one person. That may be its greatest lesson. As afternoon gently fades toward evening, you prepare one final camp beside a quiet river lined with tall pines. The fire burns steadily while supper cooks with its familiar aroma of roasted meat, fresh bread, and hot coffee. The horses graze peacefully nearby, their slow breathing blending with the gentle murmur of flowing water. The routine feels comforting, almost timeless. You sit quietly beside the glowing embers without feeling the need to fill the silence. The wilderness has taught you that reflection deserves as much attention as movement. Some journeys end. Their lessons do not. The American mountain man was never simply a rugged individual wandering alone across an empty continent. He was a learner, an observer, a trader, a guide, a neighbour, a husband, a father, a companion, and sometimes simply an ordinary person trying to build a meaningful life beneath an extraordinary sky. His greatest achievement was not conquering the wilderness, it was learning how to live within it. The fire slowly settles into glowing embers while countless stars appear overhead for one final night. The same heavens watched every traveller who ever crossed these mountains, and tonight they quietly watch you as well. Your long journey reaches its peaceful conclusion. The mountains remain, the rivers continue flowing, and somewhere, if you listen carefully enough, the gentle footsteps of the American mountain man still seem to echo across the endless frontier before you settle completely into a restful sleep. I would love to hear which part of this remarkable journey stayed with you the most. Was it the lonely rivers, the towering mountains, the friendships formed around quiet campfires, the Great Rendezvous, or the families who built new lives across the frontier? Leave a comment sharing the moment that captured your imagination and let everyone know where you listened from tonight. Your thoughts and conversations help keep these stories alive for people around the world. If you enjoyed traveling through the complete history of the American mountain man, there are many more peaceful historical journeys waiting for you here on the channel, each one exploring another forgotten world with the same calm storytelling and quiet attention to history. Until our next adventure together. Thank you for sharing this evening, and thank you for helping preserve these remarkable stories for future generations. Blessings to you and your family,